Chapter 211. Finally. Sulen sneered. Ah! A few screams suddenly sounded in the silent night sky. A lightning flashed, and Sulen had already rushed up. The hard ground was directly cracked. After arriving at the scene in an instant, Sulen saw a few ice-blue shadows moving quickly. In the blink of an eye, they pounced on Sulen. Their sharp claws flashed with cold light as they grabbed at Sulen's neck. The chill made Sulen's skin tighten. He exerted force on his feet, and his body that was originally rushing forward suddenly stopped. The lightning on the purple dragon halberd in his hand surged, and a dazzling lightning was drawn in the darkest time before dawn. Bang! The lightning exploded, and the several ice-blue shadows that had rushed towards Sulen were sent flying backwards at a faster speed than before. The shadows rolled on the ground and stood up again. At this time, Sulen finally saw the appearance of these attackers. These attackers were tall and very similar to wolves, but their fur was ice blue. They were at least 1.5 meters tall at the shoulder and more than 2.4 meters long. Their claws and teeth were sharp, and there were some ice crystals that appeared when they breathed. Winter wolves. Sulen's eyes flashed. He had already recognized these giant wolves. These were the magic creatures that lived in the northern wasteland, the winter wolves. They were also the most dangerous of all the wolf creatures. Not only were they big, but they could also use ice spells. They were immune to ice spells, but fire spells would cause double damage to them. Winter wolves usually formed a pack of 5 to 6 wolves. Sometimes, they would also act together. More importantly, winter wolves were very intelligent, on par with ordinary humans. They also knew the common language and the language of giants. At the same time, they could communicate with ordinary wolves, wargs, and even domestic dogs. They could be said to be very cunning and difficult to deal with. Adventurers who came to the northern wastelands had also fallen into the traps of the winter wolves. These cunning winter wolves, who knew the common language, would even shout, "Help," to attract humans. Often, careless adventurers would fall into their traps. Of course, although winter wolves were dangerous, their fur was very popular. Ordinary winter wolf fur was sold for 2,000 kinnar. Winter wolf fur could be made into cloaks, boots, robes, and other magic items that could resist cold. Some of the fur with beautiful colors could be sold for a higher price. Only your own fur was more expensive. The most popular ones were dragon penis and dragon skin. Dragon penis would be crazily fought over as soon as it appeared, and dragon skin could be made into light leather armor. In reality, wyvern eggs weren't very popular among adventurers. Wyverns had a low chance of hatching, and they were difficult to tame after hatching. In addition, feeding a wyvern cost a lot of money. Hence, only a few great lords and countries would breed wyverns. The 5 winter wolves in front of him stared at Sulen with their blue eyes. The attack just now made them hesitate, but Sulen did not give them time to think. He moved and rushed toward one of the winter wolves. Since the attackers were winter wolves, Sulen would not let them go. Seeing Sulen rushing over, the winter wolf wanted to dodge, but it was too late. It could only open its mouth and use frost breath on Sulen. The other winter wolves saw Sulen's attack and did not hesitate to attack Sulen. Although the winter wolves were strong, they were only level 3 magical beasts. How could they be a match for Sulen? The frost breath only caused some frost to appear on Sulen's body. In the blink of an eye, he recovered without even frostbite. The lightning wrapped around the purple dragon halberd exploded in an instant. The surrounding 3 meters was covered in lightning. The paralysis effect of a single lightning bolt was limited. The Constitution had a high chance of immunity, but with a large amount of lightning gathered, the paralysis rate rose sharply. The winter wolves were paralyzed as soon as they pounced. Sulen's purple dragon halberd swept across, and the 5 winter wolves were beaten back again. At the same time, they were all wrapped in lightning and could not move for a moment. Sulen shook lightly, and the layer of frost on his body shattered and disappeared. With his current resistance, the 5 frost breaths did not cause much damage. The winter wolf's frost breath was far less powerful than Cryopteris. Taking advantage of the fact that the winter wolves could not move, Sullen's purple dragon halberd quickly slashed across their throats. Scarlet blood gushed out, and the 5 winter wolves quickly lost all signs of life. Adventurers who came to the northern wastelands all knew that if they had a conflict with the winter wolves, they had to be ruthless and kill them all. Otherwise, they had to be constantly on guard against the winter wolves' revenge. The winter wolves would always remember their hatred and let that hatred settle, accumulate, and grow in their hearts until the day they took revenge again. Once the wolf pack replenished their strength, they would go on an expedition again and take revenge for every member that had died. The life of the 5 winter wolves quickly drained away. Soon, the light in their eyes dimmed, and their life force dissipated completely. A wave of hurried footsteps hurried over. It was 2 teams of fully armed barbarians. "Sir, those 5 winter wolves are the murderers. Take care of them and skin them. Remember to be careful," Sulen said with a wave of his hand. "Send a team to search the surroundings and see if there are any that escaped." The winter wolf's fur was very precious. The barbarians' craftsmanship had long been masters of skinning. They easily skinned the entire winter wolf's fur intact. Seeing the complete winter wolf's fur, Sulen was amazed at the beauty of the winter wolf's fur. The ice blue fur was very soft. This kind of high-quality fur was not only used to make magic equipment, but it was also bought by noble ladies who loved beauty to make cloaks. 5 winter wolf's fur could be sold for at least 10,000 kinnar, but Sulen did not plan to sell it. Such beautiful fur was warm in the winter and cool in the summer. He planned to find a few high-level tailors to make cloaks for Chris and Hathaway as gifts. "Sir, a pack of ferocious wolves has been discovered in the forest," a drow hurriedly reported at this time. "Send someone to eliminate them directly." Sulen did not care. These ferocious wolves should have been summoned by the winter wolf, but they were obviously not used. A team of barbarians hurried over with a team of spearmen and longbowmen. When dawn came, all the ferocious wolves were either killed or escaped. Then, there was a batch of wolf meat in Mirror Lake City as food reserves. Without the threat of the winter wolf, the progress of Mirror Lake City accelerated again. Even Sulen stopped fishing and cast mud to stone on all the foundations of the city walls. Finally, after 2 weeks, the city walls of Mirror Lake City were finally built. Sulen was relieved. These days, he had cast mud to stone close to the last time. If it were not for the mana recovery effect of the tungsten steel, his energy would have been drained. The city walls had a circumference of 4 kilometers, a square shape, and a height of 6 meters. Such a small city did not originate from the kingdom of Florence, but it was the second city in Sullen's territory. A lot of soil had to be excavated during the construction of the rammed earth city walls, so Sulen directly asked them to dig a moat outside the city walls. The moat was 10 meters wide and 3 meters deep. The 2 ends were connected to Mirror Lake next to it. City wall, Mirror Lake City rammed earth city wall, height 6, 12 meters, length 4.02 kilometers. The establishment of the city wall symbolizes that the city has defense and that the land has officially entered the era of civilization from the barbaric era. City defense +10, popular sentiment +8, civilization +3, stability +5, rammed earth city wall defense against water attacks -15. With a city wall, the people have a sense of security. Moat, Mirror Lake City width 10 meters, depth 3.21 meters, length 4.8 kilometers. The construction of the moat increases the difficulty of the enemy's attack. At the same time, it promotes water transportation. Defense against water attacks +10, city defense +8, popular sentiment +3, prosperity +3, transportation +2. The construction of the moat and the city wall gave Mirror Lake City a certain level of defense. A new city, Mirror Lake City, under construction, appeared on Sullen's system panel. After the construction of the city wall was completed, Sulen immediately built a warehouse in the city and transported all kinds of resources to the warehouse for storage. Then, all the slaves and workers were moved to the city to live. Because of the city wall, the safety was guaranteed. Sulen first arranged for the craftsmen to build houses. Because of the lack of time, the conditions of the houses were simple. They were just large bungalows, and each room could accommodate dozens of people. The construction of such rooms was fast, and a dozen of them were built in 1 or 2 days. Then, he let the workers and refugees live in them. As for the slaves, he built some fences. It was almost summer, and the temperature was comfortable. Even if the kobolds and goblins were outdoors, they would be fine. After the construction of the city wall was completed, he needed to build the residences, city lord's mansion, barracks, shops, port, and other buildings. After the construction of North Town City, he had trained a large number of skilled workers. These buildings could be built slowly. Sulen handed the safety of Mirror Lake City to Aiden. The 500 North Town City soldiers were all left here. Sir. Just as Sulen was giving Aiden the task, a guard hurried over with a bad expression. What's wrong? Sulen raised an eyebrow. Is there an enemy? No, there's a problem with the workers' dormitory that was built 2 days ago, the guard said hesitantly. What's wrong with the workers' dormitory? You should go take a look yourself, the guard said evasively. Sulen nodded and followed the guard to the workers' dormitory. Soon, the group arrived at the workers' dormitory. There were already soldiers standing guard outside. Sulen passed through the blockade and walked into the room. He immediately saw a dozen muscular men hugging each other. Some of them were even half-naked, ready to fight. It was a very uncomfortable scene. Sulen felt the hairs on his back stand. His butt tightened. Separate them and lock them up, Sulen said with a dark face. A group of soldiers rushed in and dragged these people out. Sulen looked around the room in shock. Workers' dormitory, comfort +8, stamina recovery +10, broken back affection +22, mutual affection +20. Chapter 212. Broke back love? Mutual affection? What kind of attribute was that? Like hell, I'll be happy with you. Sulen was speechless. He hurriedly left the house. Tear down this workers' dormitory, Sulen said with an ugly expression. If this house was left for a while longer, all the workers inside would become gay. By then, Mirror Lake City would have to change its name. A team of craftsmen immediately came forward with all kinds of tools and began to tear down the house. This kind of house was simple to build and easy to tear down. After a series of clanking and clanking, the house quickly became a pile of ruins. Burn all the wood and dump the soil. Then, build a new workers' dormitory, Sulen ordered. While they were rebuilding, Sulen went to check the attributes of the remaining workers' dormitory. The result was good. There were no weird attributes like broke back love or mutual affection. The new workers' dormitory didn't change much. It was still a large bunk, but this time, there were no weird attributes. Workers' dormitory, comfort +9, stamina recovery +10, cleanliness +5. After confirming that all the buildings were normal, Sulen continued to arrange things in Mirror Lake City. The military was left to Aiden. In terms of city construction, Sulen picked a good basic officer, Hanferson. He was in the first batch of graduates of the Northern Town Basic School. He was also one of the most hard-working students. His grades were very good. A few scholars liked him very much. Name, Hanferson, loyalty, 90 profession, basic officer, beginner scholar strength, 8 agility, 7 spirit, 7 constitution, 8 charm, 8 command, 45 characteristics, talent strict discipline, serious, smart, management, learning, observation skills, quick record, Northern Town law, basic sword skills, deception, proficient in arithmetic specialization, beginner scholar weapon proficiency, sword skills 56, horsemanship 47, bow 61. Sulen let Hanferson take charge of the construction work in Mirror Lake City. After arranging the affairs in Mirror Lake City, Sulen returned to the North Town City. In more than a month, the North Town City had become more prosperous and lively. There were still a lot of construction sites in the city, and the construction of residential markets and commercial districts had not been completed yet. However, the central avenue of the North Town City, Rising Sun Avenue, and the Triumphal Arch were still under construction. The construction of the Arc de Triomphe had never stopped. Now, a large amount of white marble was piled up in the area. More than 1,000 slaves and craftsmen were working on it. In a month, the foundation of the Arc de Triomphe had been completed. However, it would take at least a few months to complete the construction. After returning to North Town City, Sulen went to soak in the hot spring first. He had been in Mirror Lake City for more than a month. Although he had gone to the lake to take a bath, the wilderness was not as comfortable as home. Angela and Anna were wearing thin clothes. The half-elves were tall and slender, and their waists were thin like willows. The curves of their backs were round, and their waists were slender. The thin clothes on their bodies were faintly discernible, revealing their white jade-like arms and legs. Even their delicate features were somewhat similar. They looked like a pair of twin flowers. After soaking in Sulen's water, they looked even more charming. At this moment, the two were helping him massage his body. The thin clothes on his body were quickly soaked by the hot spring. Sulen lay comfortably in the pool and enjoyed the service of the two. After a night of life and death battle, War God, Plasma Cannon, Sulen walked out of his room feeling refreshed. The morning air was already a little warm. The smell of summer had already spread across the northern wilderness. The construction of North Town City had already begun. As soon as the sun rose, the workers in the city began to organize the refugees and slaves to carry all kinds of tools to the construction site or reclaim the wasteland. North Town City had the harvest altar, so the land around the territory had been enhanced. Therefore, the food production had always been good. Many of the refugees and slaves who were farming were envious. They didn't even dare to think about such good land in the past. Now, as long as they worked for 5 years and accumulated enough work points, they would be able to exchange for a piece of land that belonged to them at the city hall. Seeing the city getting busy, Sulen also felt a sense of accomplishment. In less than a year, he had built a city from nothing in the wilderness. Sulen had a simple breakfast and then went to the Arc de Triomphe. The marble used in this wonder of a building needed to be fused with stone to mud. The Arc de Triomphe was made of large pieces of marble. After being transported back from the Sierra de Lotus, they were polished by stonemasons and then carved by master sculptors. These carved pieces of marble would be marked and placed according to the mark numbers. The Arc de Triomphe had 8 large reliefs. There were also statues of all kinds of flowers, birds, angels, and monsters. All of the master sculptors in North Town City were gathered here. Sulen even spent money to hire some master sculptors from the northern provinces. The Arc de Triomphe wasn't just a simple arch. The Arc de Triomphe on the blueprint had a hall, staircase, and exhibition room. This place would display the contributions and sacrifices of North Town City in previous wars. At the same time, the battle spirit stone was also placed in this exhibition room. As a matter of fact, the Arc de Triomphe and the Martyr's Palace on the blueprint of the wonder of a building that Sulen had obtained. However, Sulen didn't have the blueprint of the Martyr's Palace. The two buildings complemented each other. After fusing all the marble pieces of the Arc de Triomphe, Sulen left the place. Although North Town City's infrastructure was more than half complete, there were still many places that needed upgrading. For example, the barracks and the training ground. In order to ensure North Town City's prosperity, they had to have enough military force to protect themselves. Otherwise, everything before them would be nothing but an illusion. After a few expansions, the barracks in North Town City were no longer enough. Now that the city had been upgraded, the barracks could be upgraded as well. Upgrading the barracks wasn't too difficult. Sulen gathered 100 blacksmiths and 500 slaves and started upgrading them. The barracks, toilets, armory, and bathrooms in the barracks were all upgraded. A lot of training equipment was added to the training ground next to the barracks. Sulen even built some of the training equipment he used in his past life, such as the balance beam, uneven bars, parallel bars, horizontal ladders, obstacle training ground, spear training ground, shooting range, and a training ground. Boss, What are these things? Are they useful? Standing next to Su Luan, Boulder looked at the balance beam, parallel bars and obstacle training in front of him and asked with some doubts. He knew that those stone locks and horizontal bars were used to train strength, but what were these things for? Su Luan said proudly, "These are good stuff. The balance beam can train a soldier's sense of balance. The obstacle training can help them pass through obstacles quickly. The horizontal ladders are, how can these simple things be so useful?" The others beside him didn't believe it either. The results of modern scientific training over a few decades were no joke. Su Luan glanced at them and didn't say anything else. What was the point of talking about it? They would know once they experienced it themselves. Training ground, difficulty enhancement +20, proficiency +13, limit break +5, training effect +16, training addiction +15. The newly upgraded training ground was much better than the previous one, and the various attribute enhancement effects were also very strong. What surprised Su Luan even more was that there was a limit-breaking effect. What was the effect of this effect? Could it help soldiers break through their limits and become heroes? If that was the case, Su Luan was going to make a fortune. If you want to know how effective it is, why don't you give it a try? Su Luan said to them. Sure. Johnson nodded and led some soldiers into the training ground. The food supply for the soldiers in Northern Town City was abundant. Even the new recruits looked like healthy young men, let alone the veterans. The amount of food and meat consumed in the barracks was a lot higher than anywhere else in Northern Town City. Not all the soldiers in this world were as rich as Northern Battlefront City. The soldiers in the northern provinces were lucky if they could get 2 meals a day. Most of the time, apart from the personal guards, the rest of the soldiers were recruited at the last minute. They would enter the battlefield after some simple training. Only the elite soldiers would get 3 meals a day. Even so, they would only get some meat every few days. The soldiers in Northern Battlefront City had meat every day. Only the personal guards of nobles were treated like that. Most of the soldiers in the city were farmers. They usually farmed and were given a spear when needed. In other words, they were cannon fodder. Every soldier in Northern Battlefront City was an elite. According to the game, they were elites. The generals were like mini-bosses. In the training ground, after Su Luan explained the usage of various equipment, the soldiers began to train. The loud slogan sounded. Su Luan asked someone to bring a reclining chair, and then lay leisurely in the shade of a tree to watch the soldiers train. The soldiers soon realized that the seemingly simple training was not as simple as it seemed. They could feel the pressure when they entered the training ground. It felt like their bodies had become a lot heavier. They followed the steps of the training. The soldiers soon fell in love with the training method. They continued to train tirelessly. It didn't take long before the ordinary soldiers couldn't take it anymore. They were all exhausted, but even so, these people still wanted to continue training. Su Luan realized something was wrong when he saw the situation. He asked them to stop. "Boss, why did you ask us to stop? We haven't finished our training yet," Johnson said excitedly. "Look at those soldiers. Do you think they can still be trained?" Su Luan glared at him. He mumbled to himself, "Is training addiction really that effective?" Chapter 213. What's going on? Johnson looked at the other soldiers in shock. Other than the barbarians who were still standing beside him, the other human soldiers were all lying on the ground, soaking wet as if they had just been fished out of the water. They were gasping for air. Sheriff Harrison's eyes widened, and he said, "Are the new recruits now so smart?" He and Aiton had been the new recruits' instructors, and these new recruits were trained by him in the beginning. When they first joined, they were the kind of guys who had to be beaten, scolded, and whipped to train obediently. If he wasn't careful, they would slack off. Why did they all change and work so hard today? Could it be because of the Lord? Good, you shameless bastards. You haven't even finished the new recruit training, and you've already learned how to suck up to the Lord. Harrison's eyes scanned back and forth. If he was half as smart as these soldiers, he wouldn't have been kicked out of the Silver Eagle Legion. It seemed that he had to learn from them in the future to suck up to the Lord and get himself a noble title. Arrange for someone to remind them during training in the future so that they don't get hurt, Su Len said with a guilty conscience. Get someone to carry them to the barracks. Su Len had already seen the barracks in the army after they were built. They had a few attributes such as recovery of stamina, cleanliness, and sleeping peacefully. There were no weird attributes such as surging homosexual feelings. Training addiction alone might cause those soldiers to get hurt, but with the barracks attributes, the two complemented each other perfectly. In the future, he wouldn't have to worry about the soldiers slacking off during training. A group of exhausted soldiers fell asleep quickly after being carried to the barracks. When they woke up, they were more or less recovered. After upgrading the barracks and the training ground, Su Len planned to upgrade his training ground as well. His training ground was specifically for training the dodging talent. After such a long time of training, he had mastered a roll dodging ability. As for the other dodging abilities, he only had some ideas. If he wanted to master them, he would have to continue training for a long time. Su Len brought the craftsman to his training ground and began to upgrade it. The structure of this training ground was complex, so upgrading it was a bit slow. It would take at least 2 days to complete the upgrade. Su Len left after looking at it for a while. He didn't plan to wait here forever. When Su Len left, the population of Northern Battlefront City had already exceeded 15,000 people. Later, 3,000 people were moved to Mirror Lake City. However, after the caravan manager, Jean, spent a lot of money to recruit people, the population of Northern Battlefront City did not decrease. Instead, it increased quite a bit. Now, the small feudal lords in the northern provinces had already regarded Xian as the god of fortune. After all, in the eyes of those feudal lords, sending away the refugees who were affecting the stability and harmony of their territories could make a lot of money while they were at it. Why not? During this period of time, the population of Northern Battlefront City had already reached 17,000 people. The streets of Northern Battlefront City were being built as fast as possible. It could be said that in the entire Northern Battlefront City, other than Su Len, no one was idle. Even those who violated the city's sanitation regulations would not be thrown into jail. Instead, they would be chained up and forced to work. The housing problem of the refugees was very easy to solve. If it really didn't work, they would first build some shared dormitories. The men and women would be managed separately. Food was also quite abundant in Northern Battlefront City. With housing and food to eat, the refugees would quickly settle down. After settling down, the refugees would be assigned to various construction sites to work. Right now, Northern Battlefront City lacked basic-level officials. Although basic-level officials didn't have high positions, they still had to carry out many policies in Northern Battlefront City. They still had a lot of power, so it was inevitable that some of them would abuse their power and accept bribes. Some of the basic-level officials had too little professional knowledge, so they could only make do with it. Although Northern Battlefront City had a basic academy to train officials, it still took some time to train a basic-level official. There were just too many illiterates in this era. The growth of the basic-level officials couldn't keep up with the growth of the population. It was very difficult to supervise the basic-level officials. In ancient China, there was a saying that the royal power was not allowed in the countryside. It meant that the power of the dynasty could only reach the county level. The basic-level officials were all local gentry, clans, and elders. There were still many remnants of this situation even in modern times. Su Len grew up in the countryside in his previous life. He had seen the basic-level officials. To put it bluntly, 2,000 years ago in the countryside, basic-level officials were almost the same as the underworld. Later on, when information technology became more advanced and the supervision became stricter, things slowly improved. Su Len couldn't do anything about this for now. It was useless to build more schools if there weren't enough teachers. However, Su Len still had a lot of ways to deal with abuse of power, corruption, and accepting bribes. He built a prison in the past. It was quite effective, but he didn't use it on the basic-level officials. However, after this kind of illegal behavior happened again, he planned to make visiting the prison as the first stop for the officials. In order to enhance the effect, Su Len also planned to upgrade the prison. Although the prison in the past was effective, wouldn't it be better to enhance the effect? Since he had already thought of it, he would do it. Early the next morning, Su Len put down Chris and Hathaway who were wrapped around his body. He walked past Angela and Annie who were sleeping soundly beside him and swung a pendulum to the bathroom at the side to wash up. After a simple breakfast, Su Len found a group of craftsmen to bring him to the prison. There weren't many people in the prison in northern Battlefront City at the moment. Most of them had been brought out to do voluntary labor. The prison wouldn't keep idle people. Not only did you have to earn money to pay for your meals, you also had to pay for your room in the prison. When they arrived at the prison, the warden appointed by Su Len, Abayo, quickly greeted them. "How many prisoners are there in the prison?" Su Len asked directly. "Sir, there are 53 people in the prison. There are 11 serious criminals and 42 light criminals," Abayo said respectfully. "What kind of crimes did the serious criminals commit?" "Robbery, murder, and violent resistance. Send them to the mines to work for 20 years. If they survive, let them go." Su Len directly decided the future of those people. "Send the rest of the light criminals to the construction site to work. During this period, I will upgrade the prison. The prison staff will guard the criminals and empty the prison." "Yes, sir." Abayo nodded and immediately asked the prison guards to bring all the prisoners out. After everyone left, Su Len began to upgrade the prison. Su Len combined the myths of his previous life with some legends about the river Styx, the god of death, and the abyss in this world. He began to add some elements to the prison. For example, the main gate of the prison was built like the gates of hell. All kinds of legendary monsters were carved inside the prison. They looked ferocious and terrifying. At the same time, the corridor leading to the prison was specially painted with scenes of the god of death judging souls. The innocent could continue to live in the city of the dead, but the guilty would be sent to various places to be tortured. The style of the prison was dark and gloomy. Su Len also showed the various kinds of torture in his previous life in pictures. Skinning, dismembering, cutting at the waist, and so on were all routine operations. There were also hot chains, deep fryers, mountains of knives and seas of fire, iron brushes, and so on. Each one looked more horrifying than the last. The artists hired by Su Len were terrified when they heard the descriptions, especially when they were in such a gloomy and depressing environment like the prison. At Sullen's request, the artists even drew the details of the torture as if they were alive. Statues of ferocious beasts were carved at regular intervals. At the same time, with the help of the light effect, these ferocious beasts looked ferocious and terrifying. The transformation of the entire prison took 5 days. When the prison was completed, it looked ferocious and terrifying just from the outside. It made people subconsciously want to escape. Excellent prison, this is an eerie and terrifying prison. Anyone who commits a crime will receive double the punishment here. Gloomy terror plus 32, extreme sturdiness plus 36, suppression plus 34, imprison criminals plus 32, repentance plus 33, reformation plus 35, psychological intimidation plus 33, city security plus 26, people sentiment plus 20, prosperity minus 3. Su Len looked at the prison he had built under his guidance with satisfaction. Judging by the number of buffs, the prison was even stronger than Sullen's Castellan Palace. It was the highest level building in the northern citadel. "Is this a prison?" asked the workers who were staring at the prison with lingering fear. "Of course it's a prison. Do you want to experience it for yourself?" said Su Len to the workers with an evil grin. "No." The workers immediately shook their heads in rejection after hearing Sullen's words. Su Len ignored them. He waved at the guards beside him and said, "Bring the officials here in batches." "Yes, sir." The guard bowed respectfully and left in a hurry. After waiting for about 15 minutes, the guard brought a dozen or so officials to the prison gate. "My lord." The officials saluted Su Len. "All right, get up. There's only one thing I called you here today. All the officials in the Northern Citadel have to go through an ideological education course. Only by passing this course can you continue to be an official in the Northern Citadel, said Sulen as he walked up to them. Ideological education course? Everyone looked at each other. Yes, ideological education course. Sulen nodded. He pointed at the prison and said, the course is simple. Come with me and the guards to visit the prison later. It won't take long. Sulen glanced at everyone calmly and said, let's begin. Then, a guard led Sulen and the officials into the prison. Chapter 2:14. Sulen led a dozen officials into the prison. As soon as they entered, the light dimmed instantly. The surroundings quieted down involuntarily. A gust of chilly wind blew through the passageway, causing the officials to shiver involuntarily. Although it was daytime, the passageway was still very cold. The lights on the walls were also somewhat dim. Under the dim light, the lifelike murals on the walls gave people a sense of immersion. The ferocious beasts and evil spirits on the murals seemed to jump out at any moment. The screams and wails of the people on the murals seemed to be right next to their ears. The various tortures made people tremble in fear. Sulen was very satisfied with the expressions of these people. This prison was only ineffective against the prison guards and wardens. However, once they violated the prison system, they would be treated the same way. The dim passageway was very long. Due to the lack of light, it gave people the feeling that this path was endless and led to the Styx River or the land of death. The ferocious sculptures that appeared a short distance away sent chills down one's spine under the dim light. All the shameful things that one had done in the past, or things that violated the law and morals, would appear in one's mind once again and begin to magnify. Then, one would involuntarily compare the consequences of the things that one had done to the painting on the wall just now. Many people revealed fear and paleness as they walked. It was not easy for them to walk through the passageway of the prison. When they reached the inside, there were all kinds of torture instruments. The environment of the prison made their hearts, which had just relaxed, tense again. Many people cried bitterly. Some even knelt down and complained about their mistakes while crying bitterly and begging for punishment. When everyone came out of the prison and saw the bright sunlight again, they suddenly felt like they had seen the light of day again. Sulen opened the attributes of these people to check. Soon, he found that these people had an additional talent of fairness and integrity. Looking at these people's pale faces and sweating profusely, Sulen was secretly pleased. Next, Sulen had a cordial conversation with these officials. He encouraged them and highly praised their work. Then, he asked them to put down their ideological burdens and go back to work. After training this group of officials, Sulen continued to send people to bring the other officials here in batches. Then, he asked the prison guards to take this group of people on a tour of the prison. Soon, the same scene appeared again 10 minutes later. Sulen skillfully encouraged this group of frightened officials and asked them to go back to work again. Following this pattern, after spending a day, all the grassroots officials had toured the prison. Then, this ideological education course was also promoted to the middle-level officials. The effect was still remarkable. From today onwards, there was a new rule in the northern city. All officials had to come to the prison for ideological education before they officially took up their jobs. Only after ideological education could they start work. After a period of ideological education in prison, the officials of Northern Battlefront City instantly became honest and just. All kinds of abuse of power, corruption, and bribery in the past all disappeared. The operation of the entire city became smoother. The data showed that the prosperity of the city and the progress of the construction had improved. Just as the officials of the northern city were receiving ideological education, Sulen's training ground was also upgraded. The upgraded training ground didn't seem to have changed much. Some tools were added, but the attributes had changed a lot. Training ground, dodge training enhancement plus 28, difficulty increase plus 25, strength suppression plus 24, reflex training plus 25, training bonus plus 22, durability plus 25, smooth operation plus 26. Seeing the upgraded training ground, Sulen was eager to try it out. After quickly installing the machine, Sulen began to train. The most obvious feeling was that after the training ground was opened, Sulen immediately felt an invisible force surrounding his body. This force restrained his strength. Then, the difficulty of the training also skyrocketed. The training that Sulen could handle easily became difficult again. In the end, he finished today's training in a sorry state. However, the training effect was very good. The experience points gained were twice as much as before. With the improvement of the training effect, Sulen felt that it wouldn't take long for him to master a new dodge ability. After the northern city's army was reorganized for a while, Sulen began to prepare for the next step of expansion. This time, he set his sights on the Duergar in the underground world. The Grey Dwarves were the cousins of the dwarves. They were also good at mining and smithing, and they were quite strong, too. The dwarven warriors were quite famous. If they could recruit the Grey Dwarves, Northtown's weapon smithing standards and military strength would improve once again. However, it wasn't easy to enslave the Duergar. Sulen planned to take the drows, centaurs, and barbarians with him. As for the humans, they weren't suitable to fight in the underground world. Sulen brought Hathaway, Karina, and 1,000 soldiers to the entrance of the northern city's mine that led to the underground world. After opening the steel door, the group quietly entered the passage to the underground world. This time, Sulen planned to sneak up on the Duergar. He took out the sky lantern and cast group invisibility. Then, the northern city's army disappeared into the passage. In order to deal with the environment of the underground world, Sulen chose the warriors with dark vision. The drows had the strongest dark vision, with 120 feet of dark vision. As for the barbarians and centaurs, they had 30 feet of dark vision. However, this dark vision was enough. After all, the Underdark wasn't completely dark. A large number of fluorescent plants provided dim light. The dark passage didn't cause too much trouble for the army. After the drows arrived, they were like fish in water. Some of the underground salamanders in the passage were killed as soon as they appeared. In the face of the army, these monsters couldn't resist at all. Because they had been through this passage before, the army moved forward quickly. After about half an hour, the army walked out of the narrow passage. "It's so beautiful here," Hathaway said with an infatuated expression as she looked at the fluorescent spores floating back and forth in the air. Indeed, the fluorescent plants unique to the underground world made the originally dark world brilliant. The Underdark represented the entire underground world. It could be a single huge space, or it could be an underground cavern connected by countless tunnels. According to the planetary void theory, most worlds had an underground world. Sulen wasn't interested in the formation of the underground world. He was interested in the rich mineral resources and slaves of the underground world. Wow, this is shadow grass. This is ghost face mushroom. This is dark night flower. After coming to the underground world, Hathaway quickly found a lot of magical plants. These magical plants were the specialty of the Underdark. They were all precious potion materials. Hathaway excitedly took out her tools and prepared to collect them. "Don't rush." Sulen grabbed Hathaway, who was eager to try. Then, under her puzzled gaze, he pointed to the shadows behind the plants. With the fluorescent spores floating in the air, Hathaway finally saw the monster hiding in the shadows. An underground serpent was lurking in the dark corner. This kind of underground serpent liked to hide in the dark and launch sneak attacks. They had a big mouth full of sharp teeth, looking ferocious and terrifying. Once they bit their target, they wouldn't let go easily. They were very dangerous hunters in the underground world. However, since the underground serpent was discovered, it was easy to deal with. Sulen took out a javelin and threw it. The javelin's powerful force made it so fast that the underground serpent didn't even have time to react. The javelin pierced through its head. After killing the underground serpent, Hathaway collected the magical plants. The army then continued to advance along the tunnel. This time, Sulen didn't go to the Kobold tribe. Instead, he went directly to the giant void where the Grey Dwarf city was. With the presence of the drows, the army of Northtown City didn't encounter any difficulties. Some hook horrors, underground salamanders, and underground serpents living in the underground world were quickly eliminated. Soon, Sulen led the army to the Grey Dwarf city. With the effect of invisibility, Sulen didn't have to worry about being discovered by the Grey Dwarves. The fluorescent moss at the top of the void gave a faint light to the underground world. The Grey Dwarf city could be seen clearly in the distance. Due to the dangerous environment of the underground world, there weren't many field soldiers outside the Grey Dwarf city. It was a far cry from Northtown City's tens of thousands of acres. They were more used to building their land inside the city. This way, even if a battle broke out, the fields wouldn't be destroyed by the enemy. Sulen nodded to Hathaway. Hathaway took out her staff and began to cast a spell. Because she had to suppress the magic waves to the minimum, Hathaway's casting speed wasn't fast. The spell, which could be cast almost instantly, took almost a minute. Warlock's Eye. 5 translucent eyeballs appeared in the air. With a gentle wave of his hand, the Warlock's Eye flew towards the Grey Dwarf city. The Warlock's Eye didn't get too close to avoid being discovered. Although the underground world didn't have a clear division of day and night like the surface world, they still had time devices. The fluorescent moss also changed its brightness with the time. It was still daytime in the underground world. Sulen had enough patience to wait for the Grey Dwarves to rest. About 2 hours later, the city of the Durgar began to quiet down, and the fluorescent moss on the dome began to dim. Some of the Grey Dwarves who were working outside the city also returned to the city. Sulen planned to launch a sneak attack at midnight, so the soldiers of Northtown City took the time to rest, except for a few scouts. Hathaway, on the other hand, controlled the Warlock's Eye to keep an eye on the Grey Dwarf city. Time passed quickly. Sulen took out the magic clock made by Hathaway and looked at the time. He waved his hand, and the army of Northtown City silently advanced towards the Grey Dwarf city. Chapter 2:15. Wizard eyes had been monitoring the movements of the Grey Dwarf city from high up in the sky. The army of Northtown City slowly but surely advanced toward the city with the help of group invisibility. The land outside the city was flat. Many places were planted with edible fungi, which were the main source of food in the underworld. An underground river ran through the city. The army of Northtown City advanced cautiously. With 1,000 people moving together, even with the invisibility spell, they could still be discovered if they were careless. After all, they were only invisibility spells. Their scents and footprints would still be left behind unless they used spells to erase their tracks. The sound of the flowing river covered the sound of Sulen's army advancing. After more than an hour, Sulen led the army of Northtown City to the edge of the Grey Dwarf city. The Grey Dwarf city was originally carved out of a rock wall. After some repairs, it was built with a large amount of rock. It was unusually sturdy. If they wanted to take down the city using normal methods, they would need to have more than 10 times the number of soldiers and pay a heavy price. However, it was not impossible for Sulen to take down the city. The walls of the Grey Dwarf city might be tall, but it was not much different from a peaceful place for Sulen. A few Grey Dwarf soldiers were dozing off on the walls. Sulen pressed his hand against a rock. He was about to use stone to mud to break a big hole in the wall. "Wait," Hathaway suddenly said, grabbing Sulen's hand. "Is there a problem?" Sulen asked. Hathaway nodded. She stepped forward and touched the wall for a while. This wall was built with obsidian. It was also carved with elemental runic matrices. The entire wall is connected. Hathaway frowned. Because of the elemental runic matrices, it's very difficult to use stone to mud to break a hole in the wall. Also, the runic matrices will immediately send a message if you cast a spell on the wall. "Looks like it's not possible to enter this place quietly," Sulen muttered. He then waved at Karina and said, "There are a few Grey Dwarf guards inside. Let's attack them together and then open the gate." After that, the three of them had a simple discussion, and with the help of Fly, they successfully flew up the city wall. Since the Grey Dwarves were not at war during this period, their defense was very lax. There were only 2 sentries on the city wall who were drinking and slacking off in the lee of the wind, and a few other sentries were hiding in the houses nearby. Stun. 2 Hathaway snapped her fingers, and 2 beams of light flashed. The 2 Durgars hiding in the leeward corner didn't even have time to groan before their eyes rolled back and fell to the ground. Sulen hurriedly reached out to support them, then gently leaned them against the wall and waved at them. Karina and Hathaway then attacked the remaining Durgars in the small room. Stun. Controlling humanoid creatures. Several beams of light flashed, and the sentries who were resting in the room either fainted or were controlled by the spells. Sulen walked into the room, and it was filled with the stench of sweat and alcohol. For Durgars who loved to drink, they would drink a few glasses even if they were on duty. Other than some leftover food, there were also plenty of bottles of alcohol in the room. Sulen casually searched through the Durgars for the key to open the gate. Soon, he found a cloth pouch on one of the Durgars. There was a key, 2 rubies, and a book in the pouch. Sulen flipped through the book and saw that it was a diary. Durgars have a habit of keeping diaries? Sulen casually flipped through the pages. Most of the diary was about the daily life of a Durgar soldier, but the diary still revealed some information. For example, there were about 1,000 Durgars in this city. Sulen also found out who the Durgars' king was from the diary. He also found something even better. King Thorn is too stingy. We dug up a fist-sized ruby from the ground, and he only gave me 20 gold coins and 10 barrels of wine as a reward. He's far worse than his father, Solis. If I'd known, I wouldn't have supported him to become king. It seems that our Durgar's king isn't loved by their people. Sulen shrugged and put the diary back. Karina, let him use the key to open the gate. As you wish, my lord, Karina replied. She snapped her fingers, and the Durgars she had controlled with the humanoid creature control spell walked over with a dull look in their eyes. They picked up the key and walked down the tower. With the key, the gate of the Durgar's city was easily opened. Such a big movement must have alarmed a lot of people, but it didn't matter now. Su Luan's army had already entered the city. How could the flying dragon riders lose when they pushed the tower to the high ground? The barbarians and drows were the first to enter the city. Half of the centaurs were left outside, and the rest followed in. The large army's movement immediately woke up even more Durgars. Many of them didn't even have time to put on their armor before coming out with their weapons. Sulen took the lead on a tall black-maned horse. It had to be said that the Durgar's city was very majestic. The city streets were 10 meters long and were all paved with a layer of stone. In the center of the city stood a majestic building. It was the royal palace of the Durgars. The building was at least 20 meters tall, and there was a bright magic lamp at the top. Although the whole palace didn't have many luxurious decorations, it was magnificent and dignified. Next to the palace was a shrine, where the deities of the Grey Dwarves were worshipped. The straight and wide streets, neat and tidy stone houses, and simple and practical stone stairs, were filled with the architectural style of the Grey Dwarves. Before entering the city, Sulen had already checked the layout of the Durgar city with the wizard's eye. The drows leading the team also knew the layout, so they immediately carried out the plan. Some of them were led by Sulen to attack the palace and the shrine. The rest of the northern city's army took the intersections of the streets and separated the Durgars, killing or capturing them bit by bit. According to Sulen's plan, the Durgars were completely different from the gnolls, bugbears, and orcs. Those gnolls and orcs could only work as laborers or be sold to the arena for money, but the Durgars were different. They had exquisite forging skills and were also mining masters. Their fighting skills were also quite good. They were much more valuable than the gnolls and orcs, so it was better to reduce the number of casualties. The Durgars weren't prepared for tonight's sneak attack at all, and many of them panicked when the city gate was taken. Facing the powerful races like barbarians, drows, and centaurs, the Durgars had no advantage at all. They were quickly defeated by the warriors of the northern city. They couldn't win, so they wanted to run, but they found that their short legs couldn't outrun the long legs of the barbarians and drows, not to mention the four-legged centaurs. Seeing that there was no hope of escape, they fought desperately and were beaten back. Many of the Durgars could only choose to surrender. These cunning and selfish Durgars didn't have the thought of facing death with equanimity. Sulen rode his black-maned horse and led the army to the palace. Hathaway and Karina followed closely behind. All the Durgars they encountered along the way were sent flying by Sulen's halberd and fainted. With Sulen's current legendary rank strength, no one was a match for him. Rushing all the way to the gate of the palace, Su Luan encountered some decent resistance. 50 dwarf defenders wearing heavy armor and holding axes and hammers had already formed a formation in front of the gate of the palace. Their leader was a dwarf in golden armor and a goat horn helmet. He was glaring angrily at Su Len with his axes. "Humans, you are now attacking Dwarf King Thorn's city. If you retreat now, I can pretend that nothing happened," the armored dwarf said loudly. "I'm about to take down the entire city. I advise you to surrender now. I can guarantee your safety," Su Len chuckled. "Don't even think about it. The people of Dougal are fearless." "Is that so?" Su Len didn't waste any more words. He waved his hand and said, "Attack." The barbarians and centaurs behind him threw their axes and javelins. At such a close distance, the javelins were powerful. Even if the dwarven armor was tough, it was still dented by the impact. Some unlucky ones were pierced by the javelins and had their heads blown off instantly. Although some weren't injured, they were knocked back 2 steps by the force of the javelins. The originally neat formation was instantly scattered. Su Len took the lead and rushed forward. The purple dragon halberd in his hand was surrounded by dazzling lightning. When he rushed to the front of the formation, the purple dragon halberd swept across. The 3 dwarven soldiers in the front row were directly sent flying. Their bodies were entangled by the power of lightning. Although the metal armor had good defense, it had almost no defense against the power of lightning. All the enemies lost their fighting strength when they were hit by Sulen's purple dragon halberd. Su Len was invincible in the formation. The leading dwarf roared and rushed forward with his axe. However, this dwarf was very cunning. He didn't attack Su Len. Instead, he swung his axe at the back of the black-maned horse. If he hit, even if the black-maned horse was a product of the system, it would be finished. At the critical moment, Su Len squeezed the horse's belly. The black-maned horse retreated and instantly kicked back. It just dodged the dwarf's attack and kicked him in the chest, sending him flying far away. Chapter 2:16. Just as Su Len was about to catch up and finish him off, a powerful wave of magic suddenly came. The air suddenly became a little cold, and snow-white ice crystals quickly appeared and began to spin. Ice storm. Counterspell. The ice storm that was forming was suddenly interrupted, and the ice crystals suddenly shattered. A grey dwarf dressed as a wizard hiding behind the dwarven army turned pale, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. This was because he was severely injured after his spell was interrupted. He had lost to Hathaway in a battle of will. Then, 5 fireballs flew out from behind and hit the grey dwarf wizard in an instant. An energy shield immediately lit up on the wizard's body, and under the continuous bombardment of 4 fireballs, the energy shield was directly shattered. Then, the last fireball directly hit his body. A ball of flame rose up, and the fireball spell that could melt steel exploded. The flames burned, and large chunks of flesh were directly burned into charcoal. Miserable screams of despair sounded like the cries of evil spirits from the abyss, accompanied by the smell of burnt fat that spread out. The energy in Sulen's body flowed, and the lightning on the purple dragon halberd suddenly skyrocketed. Without any hesitation, the dazzling lightning burst out from Sulen's body and enveloped all the grey dwarves in front of him. Thunder Prison. The strong lightning lit up the underground world, and a powerful electric current swept out in an instant. All the dwarves were surrounded by lightning, and their bodies were stiff and could not move. If Su Len had not controlled the power, these dwarves would have all been burned into charcoal. After a moment, the light disappeared, and all the dwarves were lying on the ground, unable to move. After dealing with these dwarves, Su Len did not stop and continued to walk to the palace. There was no one else in the palace, and Su Len found an open tunnel in one of the rooms. Without guessing, the rest of the people in the palace should have escaped from here. Letting the drows chase after the grey dwarves who escaped, Sulen constantly led people to attack the Grey Dwarves who were still resisting, and at the same time arranged for people to take over the city. With the last batch of resistance eliminated, the city of Grey Dwarves fell into Sulen's control. Sulen locked up all the Duergar in the prison and began to count the spoils of war. Congratulations, host. You have successfully breached the Duergar's city and defeated them. You have obtained a glorious victory, and your name will begin to spread throughout the underworld. Ambush of the Grey Dwarves, year 1687 of the Huiwa calendar. At the end of June, you led your army through an underground tunnel and ambushed the Grey Dwarf city. The Grey Dwarves were caught off guard by your sudden attack, and Northgard City's army easily obtained a glorious victory. Prestige +5, congratulations, host. You have conquered the Duergar city and defeated the Dwarven army. You have gained 31,200 EXP. Congratulations, host. You have conquered the Duergar city and defeated the Duergar. You have obtained 3 gold treasure chests and an item, Mount Sachet. Sulen began to check his spoils of war. 3 gold treasure chests and a Mount Sachet. They were far from what he had obtained in the last Orc War, but fortunately, he had conquered the Duergar city. Otherwise, he would have only obtained 1 gold treasure chest at most. After opening the 3 gold treasure chests, 3 rays of golden light flashed, and Sulen heard the system's voice ring in his ears. Congratulations, host. You have obtained a self-created hero template. Congratulations, host. You have obtained the skill, Reduce Enemies' Defense. Congratulations, host. You have obtained the innate skill, Lightning Reflex. Sulen was overjoyed when he saw the self-created hero template. He hadn't obtained this item in a long time, and he didn't think that he would actually obtain it this time. The self-created hero template could turn a normal person into a hero, greatly increasing their potential. It could also be used to force people to maintain absolute loyalty. The 2 uses didn't conflict. As long as the self-created hero template was combined, it represented a hero with legendary potential. It could be said that the value was very high. Sulen put away the self-created hero template and looked at the remaining 2 items. Reduce Enemies' Defense, Battle Spell, Group Effect. A spell that appeared after the system combined the rules of this world. After the spell is cast, it can reduce the enemy's defense by 10% through the power of a curse. Seeing the effect of this spell, Sulen chose to learn it directly. He had just used the skill points he had left behind last time. A light flashed, and a large amount of knowledge about Reduce Enemies' Defense appeared in Sulen's mind. This spell could be cast directly on the enemy's entire army as long as one's mental strength and strength could keep up. Of course, it would consume a lot of energy and mana. The last chest opened was a Lightning Reflex talent. Sulen already had a legendary Battle Reflex, and the effects of these 2 talents were similar. Of course, the legendary Battle Reflex was more powerful, but for talents, it was never a bad thing to have too many of them. Even if it was the most common evasion talent, if you could stack more than a dozen of them, it was estimated that it would really depend on luck if someone wanted to target you in a battle. Many legendary warriors carried more than a dozen talents, and some even had more. Because Sulen's advancement speed was fast, his talents were better than those veteran legendary powerhouses. Now that he had Lightning Reflex, he naturally wouldn't reject it. Lightning Reflex, your reaction speed has become very fast. Your reaction speed has increased by 10% among all reaction abilities. Originally, with the legendary Battle Reflex talent, Sulen's attack speed was very fast. Now that he had the Lightning Reflex talent, Sulen's attack speed had become even faster, and his evasion speed had also increased. It could be said that his overall reaction speed had been improved. Although this battle didn't escalate, Sulen's strength had increased by a lot. After sorting out his gains, Sulen began to count the benefits he had obtained from the Grey Dwarves. The Grey Dwarves had 712 captives, and the rest had died in the battle. These Grey Dwarven slaves were very popular in the human kingdoms, and it was normal for them to be sold for 100 or 200 gold coins. Those skilled blacksmiths were even more difficult to find. Sulen planned to send the skilled Grey Dwarves to the blacksmiths, and let the rest of them work in the mines. Of course, the Grey Dwarf's strength was also not bad. Although they were quickly defeated by Sullen's sneak attack, if they were really arranged in a battle formation, although Northern Fortress City could win, they would have to pay a heavy price. The Grey Dwarven defenders were famous heavy infantry in the overworld. As for the Grey Dwarven knights, it was fine to just look at them. It was said that in the First Era, the Grey Dwarven Kingdom had formed a thunderous fury legion. More than 500 Grey Dwarves had the bloodline of the Grey Dwarven King, and they had the ability, God's Descent. It was the most powerful legion at that time, but such a powerful legion had long since disappeared in the long river of history. The Grey Dwarven Kingdom had long since fallen apart, becoming the Mountain Dwarves, Turin Dwarves, Iron-Forged Dwarves, and several other Grey Dwarven kingdoms. There weren't many Grey Dwarves with the ability, God's Descent, let alone the Thunderous Fury Legion from ancient times. Apart from the 700 Grey Dwarven slaves, the greatest wealth in the city was the Grey Dwarves' accumulation. Sulen found a treasury in the Grey Dwarven Palace. The moment he opened it, he was almost blinded by the golden light. The entire Grey Dwarven Kingdom had accumulated hundreds of years of wealth, and the treasury in front of him was filled to the brim. It was like a mountain of gold. The Grey Dwarves loved to mine, and the underground world was very rich in minerals. If the dragons loved gold the most in this world, then the Grey Dwarves were the second. In order to excavate gold, the Dwarven Kingdom had once hollowed out an entire mountain and continued to dig deeper into the ground. In the end, they had even awakened the Balrog Overlord, who had been in a deep slumber since ancient times. As a result, the Balrog Overlord destroyed the Dwarven Kingdom. The Grey Dwarves were also Grey Dwarves, and these Grey Dwarves who loved to mine had accumulated an astonishing amount of gold. Apart from gold, Sulen also found a large number of gems in this treasury. There were rubies, topaz, sapphires, multicolored gems, and all kinds of gems piled up into a small mountain. There were at least several hundred pieces. Moreover, the gems in this treasury were all of high purity. Any one of these gems could be sold for thousands or even tens of thousands of kinnar. Apart from gold and gems, there were also a large number of rare metals in this treasury. Sulen even found some abyssal iron, adamantine, crimson fire copper, frost iron, and so on. He even found a small piece of mithril. These things directly made Sulen a huge fortune. Although he had not counted them, there were at least tens of millions of gold in this Grey Dwarven palace. This amount of gold was more than enough for him to build more cities. Of course, if such a large amount of gold was sold in such a short time, it would only cause an economic crisis in the northern provinces. Even if all the goods in the northern provinces were sold to Sulen, they would not be able to get so much gold. Sullen's current problem was that he had too much gold. What should he do? Of course, if Sulen knew some spells that consumed gold, the gold would be used up very quickly. For example, the Dragon's Covenant. He would sign a contract with an adult dragon and summon it into battle. After the contract was over, he would have to pay the dragon a reward. There was also the limited wish spell, which could be said to use gold to make wishes. Wizards always had a way to consume large amounts of gold. It was said that a legendary wizard would consume hundreds of tons of gold in his lifetime, or even more. After checking the treasury, Sulen went to the city's armory. There were a large number of dwarf-forged equipment stored here. There were hundreds of sets of armor and even more weapons. However, these armors were made according to the dwarf's body shape. If a human wanted to use them, they would have to undergo some modifications. Chapter 217. The city of the Grey Dwarves was called Orlander, which meant fertile land. The river that flowed through the city was called the Odonia River, and it was the largest river in the underworld. The land occupied by the Grey Dwarves was indeed a fertile land. Sulen also found a lot of food in the city's warehouse. Most of it was mushrooms and fungi, and some of it was probably a variant of potatoes. Although the land was not big, it could still feed 2,000 to 3,000 people. Sulen searched the whole city and began to escort the prisoners and gold away. The Grey Dwarves who escaped through the secret passage of the palace did not manage to escape in the end. Their 2 short legs could not outrun the 4 legs of the centaurs. After discovering that some of them had escaped, Sulen immediately sent people to hunt them down. With the cooperation of the drows who were good at hunting and the centaurs who were good at raiding, they were caught before they could escape from the underground cave. After a selection of the Grey Dwarves, there were 200 blacksmiths among them, and there were even a few blacksmith masters. This made Sulen overjoyed. There was not a single blacksmith master in the whole northern citadel, and this time, there were a few who came directly. However, there was a problem that gave Sulen a headache. Although the Grey Dwarves had surrendered, they were not willing to serve Sulen. Sulen asked the drows to train the Grey Dwarves, but even so, the results were not very good. The Grey Dwarves had the same stubborn personality as their dwarves. It was possible to make them do manual labor, but it was difficult to make them forge weapons for you. When the drows enslaved the Grey Dwarves, they would use the divine spells of the Spider Queen Lolth to make the Grey Dwarves submit. The drows in the northern citadel believed in the Dark Maiden, and they did not have the ability to forcibly enslave other races. Sulen thought for a while and finally tried to build a prison camp in the northern citadel. The prison camp was not large, and there were not many facilities inside. In only 2 days, the prison camp was completed, and the completed prison camp did not disappoint. Prisoner camp, unbreakable +18, reformation +15, a wise man submits to circumstances +18, disintegrate willpower +16, give up resistance +18, prison break -30, clean and healthy +15, the stubborn Durgars wouldn't be able to resist for long. After the construction of the prison camp was completed, Sulen directly sent all the Durgars to the prison camp to be modified. Although most of the dwarves were as stubborn as rocks, there were always a few exceptions. After 3 days of sending the prisoners of war, a few Grey Dwarves had already surrendered. After receiving the news, Sulen came here to see if they had really decided to give in. Arriving at the prisoner of war camp, as soon as he entered the door, he heard a burst of swearing. "Barker, Kashi, you two cowards. You will be spurned by His Highness Durag. Even if you die, you will only fall into the bottomless abyss, traitor. I'm ashamed of being your neighbor. Traitor. Coward. You two cowards who are afraid of death." Behind the fence, many Durgars pointed at the 2 Durgars in the fence and scolded them. The 2 Durgars lowered their heads and remained silent, their faces red. Sulen didn't care about the noise of the Grey Dwarfs. Although they were shouting happily now, it wouldn't take long for them to give in. "Have you made your decision?" Sulen asked the 2 Durgars. Barker and Kashi looked at each other and nodded. "My lord, we have decided. We are willing to serve you." "A wise choice." Sulen nodded when he saw the names of the 2 Durgars in the system interface. Although their loyalty was only at 65, as long as they had surrendered, it would not take long for the remaining loyalty to rise. A wise man submits to circumstances. In order to reward you for surrendering to the light, I have prepared some rewards for you, Sulen said with a smile. He did not care about the 2 Durgars. Sulen turned to Chris and said, "Have someone send over a few bottles of vodka." Chris nodded and asked someone to prepare them. Vodka was the name Sulen gave to the alcoholic drink brewed with potatoes. Unlike the vodka of the Russians in his previous life, the vodka brewed in Northtown was not as alcoholic. Due to technical reasons, the vodka brewed in Northtown was only 30% alcoholic. Even so, a drink with 30% alcoholic content was very rare in this world. It was currently the most popular drink in the taverns of Northtown. The sales of rum had dropped by a lot. Soon, a guard came back with 2 bottles of vodka. Even the Durgars who were yelling stopped and stared at the 2 bottles of vodka. Puff! A soft sound rang out as the cork was opened. The rich aroma of alcohol instantly filled the air. The 2 Durgars closest to the bottles took a deep breath and their throats kept sliding down. Sulen noticed their situation and laughed inwardly. As expected, these Durgars could not resist the temptation of alcohol. Sulen handed the 2 bottles of vodka to Barker and Kathy. The 2 Durgars who had long been addicted to alcohol took a big gulp after receiving the bottles. Gulp, 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 gulp. The 2 Durgars couldn't wait to raise their heads and drink half a bottle. Then their faces turned red. The clear liquid flowed down their thick beards and the rich aroma of alcohol spread out. Gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard. The Durgars in the enclosure looked at the bottles in the two Durgars' hands with longing, as if they would rush up and snatch them in the next second. Phew. Barker let out a deep breath after he recovered from the alcohol. He then said excitedly, "Sir, this is amazing. The Dwarven Fire wine is like water compared to this. This is definitely the best wine. Yes, this wine is definitely the best. I love it." Kathy yelled from the side. "I'm glad you like it. Alright, since you've decided to serve the northern city, follow them to go through the formalities. You'll officially start work tomorrow," Sulen said as he pointed at an official beside him. "Yes, sir. We're at your service," the two Durgars said happily. At this time, Suluan also discovered that the loyalty of the two Durgars had risen from 65 to 80. He estimated that as long as they stayed in northern Battlefront City for a while, their loyalty would soon rise to 90. After sending the two Durgars away, Sulen came to the front of the enclosure and said to the Durgars, "Do you have anything to say? Damn human, we won't yield. Don't even think about making us work for you." "That's right, we won't yield." The Durgars yelled again. Their expressions were exactly the same as when King Zay, who would rather die than submit, pointed at the door and said, "Piss off." "Chris," Sulen waved his hand gently. The little succubus giggled and handed over a bottle of vodka. Sulen took the bottle. The Durgars who were still cursing suddenly felt like their fates were being strangled. Sulen opened the bottle and poured out a glass. The clear liquid had a strong aroma. The aroma was like a hook that attracted the Durgars' eyes. "Do you want some?" Sulen asked softly. The Grey Dwarves nodded involuntarily. "Sure, no problem. Buck and Casey are examples," Sulen said with a smile. Suluan said with a smile, and then put the glass of wine only half a meter away from them. At this distance, they could smell the strong fragrance of the wine, but they couldn't reach it. Looking at the Grey Dwarves who stretched out their arms to grab the glass, Suluan almost burst into laughter. "That's what you get for your stinky mouths. I'm going to make you die from hunger today. I won't let you drink a single drop." Sulen left in satisfaction when he saw the Durgars stretching their arms but still unable to reach the glass. Before he left, he specifically told the guards of the prison camp to ignore the Durgars even if they were willing to yield. He didn't want them to die from hunger. After putting the Durgars aside for the time being, Sulen began to transport the various treasures in Orlando to Northtown. The Durgars had accumulated a large amount of gold over the past few centuries. Sulen planned to use some of it as coins and put the rest into the Lord's treasury. At the same time, all the soldiers who participated in the attack on the Durgar city would be rewarded. Sulen could take all the gold they obtained from the battle, but the soldiers would definitely be dissatisfied. In the end, Sulen asked Chris to come up with a reward system. All the soldiers who participated in the battle were rewarded between 30 and 100 kinnar. The large amount of rewards made the soldiers rich in an instant. At the same time, the soldiers who didn't participate in the battle were drooling with envy. The eyes of the refugees and slaves who didn't join the army were red with envy. Suddenly, a large number of people wanted to join the army. If Sulen agreed to expand the army, it would be easy to recruit 1,000 more people. The rewards made Sulen's reputation rise again. The loyalty of the soldiers who received the rewards also increased. Moreover, the morale of the army also increased. Now, the soldiers in the barracks were all eager to go out and fight at any time. Most of the soldiers who received the reward started to buy all kinds of goods in the market. Northtown's commerce was flourishing, and all kinds of goods were available. The inflow of money from the soldiers also made the market even more prosperous. Although the rewards for the soldiers cost more than 100,000 kinnar, the results were still very good. The morale of the soldiers was greatly boosted, and their enthusiasm to join the army also increased. The soldiers received a better life, and the city's market became more prosperous. It could be said that it was killing many birds with one stone. Chapter 218. The prosperity of the city made Northtown more and more famous in the northern provinces, attracting many merchants to do business there. Now, some people were calling Northtown City a bright pearl in the northern wasteland. The white sugar, rum, vodka, furs, and so on produced here were all popular goods. The white sugar was also monopolized by a few powerful caravans. Others couldn't even get a foot in the business. However, although only a few caravans monopolized the white sugar trade, they would sell the white sugar to other caravans. If they didn't share some of the benefits, these caravans would have been swallowed up by others long ago. The arrival of the caravans also attracted many people to settle down in Northtown. Although there were fewer people than Sulen who took the initiative to migrate, it was still a good sign. With people taking the initiative to settle down in Northtown, it meant that the city's attractiveness had increased. The rapid development of Northtown had attracted the attention of the northern provinces. If it weren't for the distance, the nobles would have long come here to get a share of the profits. Sulen had received a few official letters from the noble parliament, asking him to return to Cult to accept the title of nobility. According to the style of nobles, they wouldn't do things that didn't benefit them. If Sulen went back to accept the title of nobility, he would have to give them enough benefits. And once he accepted the title, Sulen would officially become a noble of the Kingdom of Florence. Northtown would also be included in the territory of the Kingdom of Florence, and he would have to pay taxes to the king. One had to know that Northtown was now built by Sulen and his men. He also spent money to buy the expansion order and all kinds of resources. Sulen didn't want to find himself a king. The territory he now occupied in Northtown was comparable to a viscount's territory. Although the population was far from enough, he would surpass it in a few years with enough time. In addition to Mirror Lake City and Galloping City, which were currently under construction, Sulen's territory was no smaller than a count's territory. His strength had also reached the legendary level, and it wouldn't be a problem for him to make himself an earl. However, he didn't intend to do that yet. If he were to make himself an earl, it wouldn't be as convenient for him to recruit refugees from the Kingdom of Florence and do business. The construction of the Arc de Triomphe was still in full swing. Every day, marble from the Sierra de Lotus would be delivered to the north gate of the city. For the convenience of transportation, Sulen had already asked his men to build a pontoon bridge over the Red Sand River and the Whitewater River. He was still considering whether to build a permanent bridge over the two rivers. As for technical problems, in this world full of extraordinary powers, many problems could be solved with magic. For example, the strength of a building. As long as an object was hardened, even if it was originally a piece of wood, it would be as hard as steel. Of course, hardening an entire bridge would be a huge project. After giving the Grey Dwarves the cold shoulder for a day, Sulen went to the prisoner camp again. Today, a few more Grey Dwarves expressed their willingness to work for Sulen. When he came to the prisoner camp again, the Grey Dwarves still cursed the traitors, but this time, their voices were much softer. Sulen naturally wouldn't mistreat the Grey Dwarves who were willing to work for him. As usual, he gave each of them a bottle of vodka and arranged for them to live and work. After sending away the Grey Dwarves who were willing to work for him, Sulen once again looked at the Grey Dwarves who were still persisting. This time, Sulen came up with a new idea. In order to celebrate the huge wealth I've gained in Orlando, I've decided to give all of you Grey Dwarves a reward, Sulen said as he stood outside the fence. You invader, robber, that's the wealth of us Grey Dwarves. Hearing Sulen's words, the Grey Dwarves who were still somewhat quiet at first became agitated again. If the anger in their eyes could burn someone to death, Sulen would have been burned to ashes by now. Face reality. I think you should be more concerned about your current situation, Sulen said with a shrug. Considering that you haven't had any alcohol for a long time, I've specially prepared some alcohol for you today. If you don't want it, I'll take it away, Sulen said with a smile as he looked at the angry Grey Dwarves. Yes, we want it. Give us the alcohol. Silence. Sulen's face suddenly became cold and frosty, and an aura that belonged to a legendary powerhouse suddenly erupted from his body. The Grey Dwarves who were still yelling were like ducks whose necks were stuck. Their mouths were wide open, but no sound came out. Seeing this situation, Sulen waved his hand, and a group of soldiers came forward. Then, they gave each of the grey dwarves a glass about the size of a thumb, and let them come up one by one according to the order of the meal. The glass was so small that it couldn't even be considered a sip. The grey dwarves drank it all in one gulp. The rich wine aroma and the mellow taste made the grey dwarves unable to stop themselves. However, this small amount of wine didn't satisfy the alcohol in their stomachs at all. Instead, it made them feel even more uncomfortable. Although these grey dwarves couldn't bear the problem of not having any alcohol to drink, at least they could still hold on. However, after taking a sip of the wine, the taste of which was far better than any wine they had ever drunk before, caused an avalanche of consequences. After drinking that glass of wine, not only did they not feel satisfied, but they also craved more wine. However, by the time they wanted more wine, Sulen had already left the prison camp with his men. On the third day, when Sulen appeared in the prison camp again, more than 200 grey dwarves asked to work for Sulen. The grey dwarves who had been cursing at the betrayers all fell silent. Seeing Sulen give out large amounts of vodka, the grey dwarves couldn't take it anymore, and kept expressing their willingness to work for Sulen. There were originally more than 700 grey dwarves, but less than 300 of them were still holding on. However, they wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Sulen had enough patience to slowly wear them down. After obtaining another 400 grey dwarves, Sulen chose some of the skilled blacksmiths to join the smithy. With the addition of the grey dwarves, the blacksmiths in Northtown City improved again. The original smithy was no longer enough, so Sulen ordered the workers to start upgrading the smithy. With more than 200 grey dwarves and humans, Sulen planned to build a large steel workshop. With the rapid development of Northtown City, even with the hydraulic forging machine, the production capacity of the smithy was still insufficient. Now that there were so many grey dwarven blacksmiths, Sulen wanted to change the equipment of the entire army on the agenda. The first thing these Durgar did as blacksmiths was to modify the Durgar armor that Suluan had obtained from Orlando. Although the Durgar armor had good defense and was sturdy and durable, it couldn't even be regarded as half-body armor when worn by the barbarians who were more than 2 meters tall. These armors needed to be modified and forged into full-body armor. Once the barbarians reached the peak level, they could equip themselves with the dwarven full-body armor and pick up a giant axe. They would be like a meat grinder on the battlefield. Of course, apart from the barbarians' armor, Sulen also planned to equip the centaurs with full-body armor to form a centaur-heavy cavalry. Due to the size of the centaurs, the armor they used was comparable to 3 sets of human armor. The armor Sulen sold them before was only for the front, and the back was for chainmail and inlaid scale armor. Now that they were his subordinates, he naturally wouldn't fool them like this. He planned to fully equip the centaurs with full-body armor, and thicken the front of the armor at the same time. After arranging the grey dwarves' blacksmiths, Sulen planned to let the rest of the grey dwarves continue mining. "Sir, I have a map of the underground world's mineral distribution for you," a grey dwarf said. Sulen's eyes lit up. After all, the grey dwarves had lived in the underground world for hundreds of years. They must have explored all the nearby minerals. This map was extremely valuable. Mineral distribution map. If it's true, I'll give you the reward you deserve. Enough vodka, and I appoint you as the new city lord of Orlando. When he heard Sulen say enough vodka, the grey dwarf's eyes instantly turned red. When he heard that he could become the city lord of Orlando, his breathing became heavier. "Sir, the map is here." With that, the dwarf sat directly on the ground and took off his leather boots. A strong smell, like pickles that had been fermented for decades, filled the air in an instant. Suluan hurriedly summoned some wind elements to blow away the smell of pickles. The grey dwarf fumbled around in the boots for a while before finally pulling out a grey parchment that emitted a strange smell. Sulen frowned and put on gloves. He resisted the urge to throw away the parchment that emitted a strange smell and took it. A guard behind him sensibly handed over a bottle of water. Sulen rinsed it briefly before flipping through the map. The map was not large. It marked the mineral veins that the grey dwarves had discovered. There were 3 iron mines, 1 copper mine, 1 gold mine, which was close to exhaustion, and 1 silver mine and gemstone mine that were being mined. So much gold in the city of the Grey Dwarves had been mined from that gold mine. Sulan did not pay much attention to the gold mine. After all, it was close to exhaustion. He was more interested in the silver mine because the Grey Dwarves had discovered some mithril in it. Mithril was a very precious magical metal in this world. It was described in many adventure stories as light as a feather and indestructible. In fact, mithril was not as exaggerated as it was described. It was more precious because of its powerful magical properties. Many powerful magic items would use this rare metal. Now that there was mithril in this underground silver mine, its value was simply immeasurable. P.S. Insufficient holiday balance, sob sob sob. Chapter 219. What's your name? Sulan put down the map and asked. My lord, my name is Bok Ironhammer Shield. The dwarf quickly said. Bok, are you sure that the silver mine on this map contains mithril? Sulan interrupted Bok's self-introduction and asked directly. Of course I'm sure. My lord, I used to be a miner in a silver mine. I once dug out a piece of mithril from this silver mine, but that stingy King Thorn only gave me a pound of gold as a reward. Bok continued to blabber on, obviously very dissatisfied with that king. Alright, since you're sure that there's mithril here, I'll let you form a team of miners, and you'll be the leader. If you can find mithril, then I'll give you the position of the city lord of Orlando. But if you can't find mithril, then... Sulan stared at the dwarf in front of him and said. My lord, please don't worry. I'll definitely find mithril for you. Bok patted his chest and promised. In that case, it's decided. If you can find mithril, I'll reward you generously. Status, money, or even vodka will be given. Now it all depends on your performance, Sulan said with a smile. My lord, I'll form a team of miners right away. After hearing Sulan's promise, Bok could no longer sit still. He hurriedly left the lord's castle and went to find other Grey Dwarves to form a team. Sulan threw the map aside with some disdain and found another piece of parchment to copy the map. Although it had been washed, the parchment still had the smell of salted vegetables on it. The map on the parchment was a little crude. After all, mapping in this world was not a professional subject like it was in his previous world. Most of the time, only they could understand the map they drew. To others, it was a completely abstract drawing. Fortunately, the map was drawn well. Although it was still crude, the general location was drawn. Soon, Sulan completely copied the parchment. After comparing the two maps again to make sure that he didn't miss anything, Sulan picked up the parchment and threw it directly into the brazier. The flames rose and quickly burned the parchment into a pile of ash. He opened the window to disperse the smoke. After forming a team of 50 miners, Bok excitedly brought his team back to Orlando to mine silver. The remaining 2 iron mines and copper mines also needed to be mined. The remaining 100 or so Grey Dwarves also formed 3 mining teams and then went to Orlando to mine ores. After the population of the northern city expanded, there was a shortage of all kinds of tools and ironware. Moreover, the army also needed a lot of equipment. The surface iron mine was originally not big. Before Sulan obtained it, many tribes had already mined it. Now, the output of the mine was very low. Was close to exhaustion. This was one of the reasons why Sulan was in a hurry to control the underground world. After several expansions, the number of soldiers in the northern city had increased to 4,000. There were 300 barbarians, 400 centaurs, 100 drows, and 300 half-elves. Apart from the war spirits that Sulan had summoned, the rest were all humans. If the militia, the city guards, and the 500 men stationed in Mirror Lake City were included, the number of soldiers in northern Battlefront City had reached a shocking 6,000 men. Adding all the people in northern Battlefront City and the newly captured Grey Dwarves, the total population had only reached 20,000. 1/3 of the population were soldiers. Such a high proportion, no matter how one looked at it, could be said to be militaristic. If it weren't for the buffs from the harvest altar and the numerous slaves, the northern city wouldn't even be able to support themselves with food. Not to mention the money, resources, and equipment needed to raise so many soldiers. In the past, the size of the northern city's army wasn't very obvious. Now, just maintaining the number of soldiers required tens of thousands of kinars worth of pay every month. Sulan had always been curious. How did his predecessors manage to not pay the soldiers and make them listen to orders obediently? They were even braver than the other when they went into battle. If Sulan dared to not pay the soldiers in the northern city for a few months, there would be a large number of deserters. It wouldn't be strange if there was even a rebellion. If it weren't for the sugar trade that gave the northern city a lot of money, it would have taken years of hard work to develop the city to this extent. The northern city's army needed a lot of equipment. Apart from the army, the centaur tribes also needed equipment to protect their herds. Fortunately, Sulan had made a lot of money from the raid on the Grey Dwarf city. Not only did he solve the problem of money, but he also solved the problem of equipment. After settling the matters in the northern city, Sulan brought the Grey Dwarves mining team and the drows back to the underworld. He was going to restore the Grey Dwarves mines and clean up the dangerous areas around the mines. He returned to Orlando. At this time, there were 100 barbarian warriors and 100 centaurs guarding the city. A group of subterranean dweller slaves were in charge of the labor. These subterranean dwellers were short. Because they lived in the dark for a long time, their eyes had deteriorated. They relied on infrared sensing to survey their surroundings, so blindness and petrification spells didn't work on them. Most dungeons had subterranean dweller slaves. They were the best growers in the underworld. Sulan brought 3 teams of Grey Dwarves to the various mines. The Grey Dwarves had discovered a lot of ore veins, but many of them were occupied by monsters from the underworld. The Grey Dwarves had to clear out all kinds of monsters every once in a while. If it wasn't for this, the other veins would have been excavated by them long ago. After resting in Orlando for a day, Sulan brought a team of drows and miners out of the city. They passed through some narrow tunnels and headed to the first mine. This mine was the closest to Orlando. It was an iron ore mine that produced good quality iron ore. It was a few grades better than the iron ore produced by Sulan's surface mine. The group moved forward in the dark tunnel, encountering a few hook horrors along the way. Hook horrors were a common type of monster in the underworld. They had sharp hearing and walked on 2 feet. Their heads looked like vultures, and their eyes were small. They had sharp beaks and a pair of compound eyes. Their bodies were covered with a layer of hard gray carapace. They looked ugly. Their eyesight was poor, but like bats, they could emit high-frequency sound waves to determine the enemy's position. Just as Sulan led the team forward in the tunnel, a dozen shadows suddenly jumped down from above. Sulan reacted quickly. Because the tunnel was narrow, he didn't use the purple dragon halberd. Instead, he swapped it for a longsword forged by the dwarves. He subconsciously swung the longsword in his hand. The hook horrors that attacked Sulan didn't expect Sulan's reaction to be so fast. They didn't have time to react before the sharp sword swept across them. The powerful force directly split open the hard carapace on the hook horrors. The monster that was about 2.7 meters tall and weighed nearly 200 kilograms was directly cut in half. The next dozen or so hook horrors didn't affect the team at all. As soon as the hook horrors attacked, the drows dodged. As for the Duergar, they were wearing heavy armor, so the hook horrors attacking them was a waste of energy. Soon, the dozen hook horrors were all killed. No one died in the team. Only a few Grey Dwarves suffered some minor injuries. After Sulan healed them, the team continued on their way. After walking out of the dark tunnel and passing through 2 desolate underground caverns, Sulan's team finally arrived at the first mine. They hadn't mined this mine for a while. When Sulan arrived, he found that the mine had been occupied by the monsters of the underworld. A group of vampire bats and underground salamanders used this place as their nest. The Grey Dwarves were already prepared for this situation. They first used smoke to smoke the monsters out, then worked together to kill them. It didn't take long for the mine to be cleared out. The information of this mine appeared on Sulan's system panel. Iron mine, ore quality +5, ore yield +8, mine disaster reduction +5, associated ore veins +2, chance of producing dark iron Oregon. With the Grey Dwarf's work, the iron mine quickly resumed production. Seeing that the mine had resumed production, Sulen didn't stop and led the rest of the team to the next mine. The second mine was a gem mine. When Sulen arrived, he found that the vein looked gloomy. There were some shadow-like creatures outside the vein. The Twisted Shadow was a type of undead creature that was formed due to certain reasons. It was similar to a ghost. This thing had very high resistance to physical damage and appeared in groups. It was very unfriendly to those who purely focused on physical attacks. At the same time, it also had spell-like abilities. If Sulen hadn't come with them today, this team of Grey Dwarves would have been finished. Their half-energy form could reduce physical damage by 50%. Normal weapons would be troublesome to deal with them, no matter how sharp they were. Elemental weapons had to be used to deal with them. Even more troublesome was that these monsters lived in groups. Their best attack was the Touch of Death, which could drain the enemy's energy and strength. Once the energy was drained, the enemy's life force would be depleted. In the Adventurer's Handbook, these monsters were rated as Grade A. Without a special way to deal with them, it was best not to provoke them. Crack. There was a soft sound, as if someone had stepped on something and broken it. Although it was a very soft sound, it was very abrupt in this quiet environment. The wandering Twisted Shadows instantly noticed this place. Chapter 220. F***CK. Sulen cursed in his heart. Then, he channeled his energy and a large amount of lightning appeared on his body. The purple dragon halberd also appeared in his hand. The distorted shadows that were attracted to this place soon sensed a large amount of life force. As undead, they hated any living thing, but they were eager to regain their flesh and blood. The distorted shadows were very fast. Sulen swept the purple dragon halberd and the distorted shadows instantly disappeared. When they reappeared, they were already beside Sulen. The surrounding negative energy suddenly increased and a dark red light appeared on the distorted shadows. Touch of Death, Sulen's body was instantly swept by the light. It was the innate spell of a high-level undead. A series of notifications appeared on the character panel in front of him. Attacked. The host is attacked by the spell, Touch of Death. Activated. Mandatory test of immunity. Test of fortitude passed. Test of constitution passed. You are immune to the stun effect of this spell attack. Your energy has decreased. The sudden appearance of the Twisted Shadow caught Sulen off guard, but his strong reaction ability allowed him to launch an attack at the first time. Lightning surged, and the purple dragon halberd with a large amount of lightning instantly hit the Twisted Shadow. The Twisted Undead, who seemed to be hiding in the shadows, had no time to dodge this time and was directly swept by the purple dragon halberd. The strong lightning energy instantly enveloped the distorted shadows. Sulen did not give it a chance to escape. The purple dragon halberd drew an arc and attacked again. Bang! Like a bubble bursting, the distorted shadows could not withstand the strong lightning energy and was directly destroyed by the lightning. The distorted shadows melted like snow and instantly turned into ashes and dissipated. Ding! With a soft sound, a gray crystal fell from the place where the distorted shadows died. It was a soul shard. Soul shards were something that only a few ghost-type monsters and abyss demons would drop. There was also a very low chance of it dropping when a powerhouse whose strength had reached the legendary level or above died. This kind of thing was very useful for wizards. The most commonly used one was the golem puppet. Sulen's eyes lit up at the sight of the soul crystals. It seemed like there were many additional rewards this time. Seeing the dozens of distorted shadows behind him, Sulen's figure flashed as he dashed forward. At this moment, a series of messy footsteps sounded from the gem mine beside him. Then, a group of skeletons with shiny black bones and a height of 2 meters rushed out. These skeletons were not as fragile as the low-level undead skeletons. All the skeletons were very thick and even had a metallic luster. They held bone blades and bone spears in their hands. As soon as they appeared, they rushed towards the grey dwarves and drows. Skeleton warriors. After several evolutions, low-level skeletons would become mid-level undead creatures. If they were allowed to evolve further, they would become skeleton generals and bone demons. Of course, it was very difficult for undead creatures of this level to appear in the material world. Only the legendary undead creatures of this level would exist in the world of undead. When the grey dwarves saw the skeleton warriors rushing towards them, they roared and ran forward with their two short legs like hot wheels. They raised their axes and rushed forward. Although they could not deal with the distorted shadows, it was still easy to deal with these skeletons. At 2 meters, the skeleton warriors were half a body taller than the grey dwarves who were only about 1.5 meters, but sometimes height was not an advantage. I hate those who are taller than me the most, especially rotten bones like you. The grey dwarf squatted and dodged the skeleton warrior's bone blades. Then, the grey dwarves swept the skeleton warrior's knees with their axes. Even if the skeleton warriors had turned into skeletons, the knees were still weak. The grey dwarves' axes were heavy, and in an instant, the skeleton warrior's knees were smashed into pieces. The 2-meter-tall skeleton suddenly lost its balance and fell to the ground. The grey dwarves turned around and went to the other side of the skeleton warriors. Then, they swung their axes and chopped off the skeleton warriors' necks. "You're not as tall as me now." The grey dwarves laughed and swung their axes again, crushing the skeleton warriors' heads. The pale soul fire in the skull was extinguished. Thunder lightning spear. A dazzling thunderbolt burst out from Su Luan's body, and then a large number of thunderbolts wrapped around his whole body. The thunderbolts surrounded his strong muscles and constantly jumping thunder and lightning. His whole person looked like the thunder god in ancient myths. The distorted shadows around him also sensed the danger. They seemed to be hesitating to escape. Swoosh, 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 the purple dragon halberd turned into a blur and swept towards the distorted shadows. Su Lan leaped and crossed a distance of more than 10 meters. At the same time, the sky was filled with spear shadows and countless lightning bolts, instantly hitting the distorted shadows. The purple dragon halberd was like a hot knife through butter as it swept through the twisted shadow's body. The powerful lightning power instantly enveloped the twisted shadow. At this time, the other distorted shadows also began to attack. The shadows pounced. Sullen's purple dragon halberd left after images in the air. The sky was filled with lightning, and a large number of shadow tentacles were drowned by the lightning. However, some of them still managed to hold on. A notification rang in Sullen's ears. "You've been attacked by the distorted shadows. You've been attacked by the touch of death. You've been damaged by death's corrosion. Your constitution has passed the test. You have legendary tenacity. Immune to death's corrosion, flurry." Just as Su Lan was attacked, the purple dragon halberd in his hand instantly turned into silver dragon surrounded by lightning. They counterattacked in the direction of the attacks. The lightning was dazzling, and the distorted shadows around him were instantly hit. As ghost-type undead creatures, although the distorted shadows were immune to 50% of physical damage, their HP was not high. After being hit by a few lightning bolts, the distorted shadows were constantly killed by the lightning bolts. Silver Dragon Inversed Scale Spear. Countless lightning bolts condensed on Sullen's body, except for the shadow of a dragon. The moment the dragon appeared, it carried a destructive aura and rushed towards the distorted shadows around him. The huge dragon's shadow swept across. Everywhere it passed, the distorted shadows' bodies instantly stiffened. Countless lightning bolts were sent into their bodies and instantly exploded. Ding dong. Ding dong. A large number of soul crystals fell from midair. The dragon's shadow dissipated, and more than half of the dozens of distorted shadows around him disappeared in an instant. Only a few distorted shadows were left that were not affected. The following battle became much simpler. The remaining distorted shadows were easily harvested by Su Lan. At the same time, the battle between the dwarves and the drows was coming to an end. Although the skeleton warriors were strong, they had no advantage against the dwarves and the drows. They were quickly wiped out under the 3 axes that chopped off their legs, necks, and heads. A large number of broken bones were left on the ground. The battle ended quickly. Sulen arranged for people to collect the spoils of war. There were a lot of spoils this time. All of them were soul crystals, which were also the specialty of the undead creatures. The undead creatures could be said to be poor. Other than soul crystals, they basically had nothing else. After the battle, Sulen gained more than 10,000 EXP and nothing else. Seeing the gem mine next to him, Sulen planned to go inside to see if there were any fish that had escaped the net. He called 2 gray dwarves who were familiar with the mine, and the 3 of them entered the mine together. The gem mine was different from what Sulen had imagined. There were rocks everywhere, and occasionally there were some colorful quartz in the mine. There were traces of a lot of mining around. Something's wrong. At this time, one of the gray dwarves suddenly said, "What's wrong?" Sulen's body tensed up instantly, and he raised the sword in his hand slightly. "The traces here are very new. They were left behind recently." The gray dwarf pointed to a trace of digging in the tunnel. "Recently? You gray dwarves didn't dig it?" Sulen's face changed. "No, we dwarves don't dig so badly," the gray dwarf said proudly. "It seems that other guests have occupied this place while you were away." Sulen said with raised eyebrows. "Let's go deeper. I want to see who dared to touch my cheese." The 3 of them moved more carefully after discovering the traces of digging. However, all the monsters in the mine had been killed, and they did not encounter anything else along the way. As they went deeper, more and more traces of digging appeared in the mine. Sulen and the 2 gray dwarves continued to follow the traces. After a few minutes, the group stopped in front of a tunnel. The tunnel was blocked by a stone wall. "Why is there a stone wall here?" "I remember there was a hall behind it for resting," a gray dwarf said. "Looks like we found the little rat who stole the mine." Sulen had a warm smile on his face, but his tone was as cold as the cold wind of the Arctic tundra, instantly freezing people into ice sculptures. "Get out of the way." Sulen came to the side of the wall and pressed his hand on the side of the tunnel. The hard rock quickly softened and turned into a pile of mud. Soon, a hole as tall as a man appeared in the side of the tunnel. In order not to alert the enemy, Sulen did not directly open a hole in the wall that blocked the tunnel. Instead, he struggled to open a passage on the side of the wall. Under Sulen's spell, the hard rock quickly softened. It only took a few minutes for a passage to be opened. Sulen only felt that the space in front of him was empty. He had already arrived at the hall behind the stone wall. The scene in front of him surprised Sulen, but it was also very familiar. This place had actually been set up as a laboratory, but it was different from Hathaway's laboratory. This laboratory had a large amount of glassware filled with all kinds of liquids, and some unknown lifeforms' organs were soaked in them. A lot of skeletons were piled up around the laboratory. These skeletons were very similar to the skeletons of the skeleton warriors outside. This gem mine had been occupied by a necromancer. Chapter 221. While Sulen was cleaning up the twisted shadows. The underground world. The dim light caused this place to be shrouded in darkness all year round. At this moment, a huge shadow suddenly emerged from the darkness. The shadow was more than 6 meters long and had a majestic body like a lion. However, unlike a lion, it had a pair of wings like a pterosaur. As it swayed its tail, it revealed a hook that flashed with cold light. It was a scorpion tail. A manticore. It was a powerful magical beast in the underground world. It was said that this monster also had the bloodline of a dragon. The pair of dragon wings was proof. As a high-level predator in the underground world, although the manticore did not have any magic abilities, its venom was very difficult to deal with. Compared to its venom, the thing used by assassins was simply a potion. In addition to being very poisonous, its venom also had the characteristic of paralysis. The manticore's venom was a prohibited item in the human kingdom. In the black market, it was sold for up to 2,000 kinar. But now, this manticore, which was at the top of the food chain in the underground world, was fleeing in a sorry state. A pair of dragon wings flapped rapidly as the manticore quickly flew through the air. At this moment, a bone spear shot out from the darkness and instantly pierced the manticore's wing. Under the pain, the manticore could no longer flap its wing. The other wing struggled to continue flying, but it could not carry its heavy body. It staggered and fell from midair. As soon as the manticore landed, a few figures rushed up. With the weak light of the fluorescent moss, one could see the dark bones on their bodies. They were skeleton warriors. The manticore found that there was no hope of escaping and fiercely pounced. Curse, weakness, curse, aging. However, as soon as it made a move, a spirit light struck its body. Its originally strong body instantly became weak and powerless, and its originally strong body suddenly became old. The surrounding skeleton warriors swarmed forward, and the lion-scorpion beast was completely trapped. Although it could still bite off the skeleton warriors, even more skeleton warriors had surrounded it when it attacked. In the face of these skeletons, the manticore beast's most powerful poison attack was completely ineffective. Not long after, a skeleton warrior seized the opportunity to pierce its throat. Although this skeleton warrior was also split into two by the manticore beast's counterattack before it died, to undead skeletons, a damaged body could be replaced. As long as the soul fire was not extinguished, they would not die. A large amount of blood gushed out of the manticore's throat. The counterattack before death had exhausted its strength. The light in its eyes dimmed quickly, and its body collapsed. At this time, a figure wrapped in a black robe and riding a skeleton horse came out. It had the characteristics of the Highlanders. It had a hooked nose, wrinkles, a rigid face, and cold eyes. Although it was tall, it looked very pale. There were 3 different rings on its fingers. One of them looked like a skeleton that was dozens of times smaller. It held a white bone staff in its hand and was surrounded by a cold aura. Seeing that the manticore was dead, the middle-aged man waved his hand. A few skeleton warriors behind him stepped forward and began to skin and cut the manticore. Damn it! Just as the skeleton warriors were cutting the manticore, the middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He quickly took out a gemstone that looked like an eye. The originally exquisite gemstone was now cracked. Who dares to attack my guards and invade my laboratory? Keaton's expression was gloomy. Damn rat. Don't let me catch you. Otherwise, I'll pull out your soul and stuff it into a rat's body. Keaton packed up the manticore. He didn't ride the skeleton horse anymore. Instead, he directly flew in the direction of the gemstone mine. Sulan didn't know that he had alarmed the necromancer. The laboratory in the gemstone mine wasn't big. Soon, Sulan turned the entire laboratory upside down. Sulan didn't touch the bones and other things inside. These things were useless. Only the necromancers would collect them. As for the bottles and jars in the laboratory, Sulan didn't take them. After all, who knew what was inside? However, in the storage room next to it, Sulan found a large number of gemstones. Obviously, these gemstones had just been excavated by the necromancer. In addition to these gemstones, there were also some books in the laboratory. Human anatomy diagrams, how to make a skeleton warrior, detailed explanation of necromancy, and more than 10 other books. Suluan packed them all up and took them away. Tui, what a pauper. Even these gemstones were excavated from my gemstone mine. Sulan pursed his lips. He casually put some magic materials into his storage space. You too, throw away those bone sticks. Don't touch those glass bottles. Now hurry up and get out. We've already searched his nest. With the necromancer's abilities, he must know by now. Let's get out of here quickly. Sulan yelled at the 2 gray dwarves who were playing with the skeleton of a skeleton warrior. He then left the gemstone mine. In the underground world, a hazy figure was flying quickly. A few distorted shadows circled around him to help him fly faster. There were also many skeleton warriors running on the ground. Along the way, Keaton didn't rest at all. With the help of distorted shadows, his flying speed was very fast. However, it didn't consume much mana. Wherever this group of necromancers passed, all monsters would retreat. As he continued to speed up, Keaton saw the gemstone mine in the distance. Landing from the sky, Keaton didn't rush in recklessly. Although he had used fly to reduce the consumption of mana with the help of distorted shadows, he had also used up a lot of mana. Someone who dared to kill the large number of skeleton warriors and distorted shadows that he had left behind to guard the laboratory was undoubtedly powerful. If he rushed in like this, there was a high chance that he would fail miserably. Moreover, he had come back in a hurry. His skeleton warriors didn't catch up. Taking out a bottle of blue potion, Keaton tilted his head back and drank it. He then had distorted shadows protect him while he used the potion to quickly recover his will and mana. About half an hour later, a group of skeleton warriors finally arrived. Keaton opened his eyes. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Little rat, I'm here. How dare you steal my laboratory? I'll make you regret being born in this world." Keaton stood up. The gloomy aura around him intensified. Sulan had the gray dwarves retreat from the mine and hide in a corner. He found a stone room outside the gemstone mine and waited quietly. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. His body flashed and he was outside. Just then, a large number of red dots appeared on his strategic map. The red dots were moving straight towards the gemstone mine where Sulan was. It was obvious that this was their destination. It was obvious that the necromancer had returned. Interesting. You stole my laboratory and didn't run away. You're still standing here. Are you begging me to forgive you? A middle-aged wizard on a skeleton horse, his body shrouded in mist, walked in with a large number of necromancers. He glanced at the messy skeletons on the ground and then looked at Sulan. You're quite strong. I've decided. I'll refine your corpse into a black knight. Then I'll stuff your soul into a rat's body. Sulan walked over with the purple dragon halberd in hand. Human. Why don't you let your companions come out with you? You can't kill distorted shadow with your strength alone. Seeing Sulan alone, the necromancer said disdainfully. There were no magic waves. Although his body was strong, for a wizard, this kind of warrior was the easiest enemy to deal with. A maze spell could trap him. I smell the rotten smell of the corpse. It's already rotten and stinking. You should have just stayed in the coffin. Why did you have to come out and scare people? Sulan calmly looked at the necromancer in front of him. Although the way he appeared looked like a big boss leading a group of guards, in the system interface, he had not broken through to the legendary level. He was only a grade 4 necromancer. It would be troublesome to deal with a wizard above the legendary level. After all, his anti-magic skill was only effective against wizards below the legendary level. Although there were many limitations to the anti-magic skill, it was enough to crush enemies below the legendary level. The eyes of the middle-aged man in front of him were dark red. Although he looked like a human, Sulan could sense that there was almost no life in his body. Instead, there was a strong undead energy surrounding him. Even if he was a necromancer, although he could use undead magic and energy, he was still a living person. Sulan felt that the man in front of him was not much different from a corpse. No, there was still a difference. He could run and jump. That strong undead energy could even make a normal corpse come alive. Hearing Sulan's words, the middle-aged wizard's face suddenly changed. In the next moment, a strange black fog gathered and quickly rushed towards Sulan. Sulan's body flashed and dodged, but the black fog seemed to have a life of its own. It turned around and rushed towards Sulan again. It turned into a cloud of smoke and directly covered the surroundings, not giving Sulan a chance to dodge. Curse. The invisible energy directly acted on Sulan's body. Sulan only felt that his body seemed to have become much heavier. But then this feeling disappeared. A large number of data appeared on the system interface. The host has been weakened by the curse. Going through a forced immunity test. Immunity test successful. The host is immune to this curse attack. Voodoo school, necromancy school. Sulan's eyes flashed. He did not expect to meet a necromancer who was also a voodoo school wizard when he came out to open a mine. One must know that these two schools were famous for being insidious. Chapter 222. Necromancers played with the dead and desecrated souls. In the eyes of many churches, they were heretics. As long as they appeared, they would be expelled or killed. The voodoo school was even more insidious. They did not have any advantage in a head-on battle and could even be said to be very weak. However, no one could beat them when it came to scheming. The voodoo school was proficient in curses. There were many types of curses, such as weakness and aging, which took effect immediately. There were also some that were invisible. They captured some of your aura and then used this aura to cast a curse. This kind of curse was invisible and difficult to guard against. Once the person was hit, they would die within a few days. In addition to curses, they were also proficient in all kinds of poisons. This was not a big deal. The main thing was that this school had participated in the fight for the throne of the secular world. The deaths of the heirs of several countries were more or less related to them. Since then, this school was boycotted by various countries. After all, no one wanted to lose their lives for no reason. Even those who had used the voodoo school to kill their competitors were the same. After all, as the victors, they were also worried that they would be killed in the same way. This also made the voodoo school become a target of scorn in various countries. How is this possible? The middle-aged man looked at Su Len in surprise and said subconsciously, "You are immune to curses? How is this possible? How can your physique be so strong?" Su Len was very curious about curses. He was not sure how to deal with that kind of invisible attack. If he could understand this kind of attack, he would try to find a way to defend against it. The middle-aged man stared at Su Len, and his eyes flashed. "Such a strong body, maybe you can even refine a death knight. I didn't expect to find such a good material in this remote underground world. I will definitely refine it with all my heart." The middle-aged man's gaze made Sullen's hair stand. This guy did not like men, right? This was not impossible. Many necromancers were necrophilic. Moreover, because of the erosion of death energy for a long time, their living environment was poor, and they were hated by others. They would definitely have psychological problems. Distorted shadows, skeleton warriors, attack. At the command of the middle-aged magus, a large number of undead creatures rushed towards Su Len. Seeing this situation, Su Len didn't fight head-on. Instead, he turned and ran. Seeing Su Len escape, the undead creatures chased after him. Although undead creatures had some intelligence, they could only understand simple instructions unless they reached the legendary level. Sullen's speed was very fast, and the undead were in hot pursuit. The distorted shadow could fly, so it was the closest. As for the skeleton warriors, they were soon far behind. They quickly ran out of the middle-aged wizard's sight. At this time, it became much more difficult for the middle-aged wizard to control these undead creatures, so he could only chase after them. Su Len led the undead creatures to where the grey dwarves were hiding. Both sides moved quickly, and in a few minutes, Su Len found the grey dwarves' ambush. At this point, Su Len finally stopped running. The energy in his body instantly exploded, and powerful lightning energy swept through the surrounding space. The distorted shadows that were chasing him were instantly enveloped by lightning energy. The purple dragon halberd carried the powerful lightning energy and drew out a dragon shadow. Silver dragon inversed scale spear. The dragon shadow formed by lightning took shape in an instant, and then directly rushed towards the distorted shadows behind him. These distorted shadows had no time to dodge, and were swept by the dragon shadow. All of the distorted shadows stopped moving, and then their bodies exploded with lightning, drowning them in lightning. Clanging sounds were endless, and a large number of spirit crystals fell from the sky. Su Len didn't care about these spirit crystals, and instead rushed towards the necromancer. At this time, the necromancer was still some distance away from the battlefield. Although necromancers were powerful, they relied more on their summoned creatures. For example, the necromancer's legendary level spell, Necromancer's Calamity, had an ordinary killing effect, but it was a disaster for ordinary people. This spell could easily turn an entire city's population into undead. The necromancer's combat power was very ordinary. Soon, Sulen saw the necromancer who was rushing here. As soon as he saw Sulen, the necromancer didn't fight, but turned and fled. However, as soon as he turned, two vigorous figures suddenly rushed out from the shadows beside him. The figures were as fast as ghosts, and they instantly appeared beside the necromancer and launched a surprise attack. These two black figures were the Drow rogues, two grade 3 assassins. Although their strength was one grade lower than the necromancer, the success rate of sneak attacking a necromancer was still very high. Feeling the threat of death, the necromancer didn't have time to cast a spell. The ring on his hands suddenly flashed, and 4 bone shields appeared around his body in an instant, blocking the attacks of the two rogues. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, he heard the sound of a mechanism being pulled. Bang bang bang. The fine steel crossbow bolts were shot out in an instant. The two rogues each held a delicate and small crossbow. The crossbow could fire 3 bolts at a time. This kind of crossbow had a very short range, only 50 steps, and its accuracy was poor, but it could only penetrate iron armor within 10 steps. The white bone shield instantly cracked, and then shattered into pieces with a bang. The two rogues attacked again. At this time, the only 2 remaining skeleton warriors around the necromancer finally reacted and quickly attacked the two rogues. Attacked by the assassins, the necromancer, who was in a hurry, was shocked. He quickly cast a protective spell on himself and then turned to escape. However, he was delayed by the two rogues, and Sulen had already caught up. Seeing the necromancer who was about to escape, Sulen clenched his hand. Lightning spear. A spear made of lightning appeared in his hand in an instant, and then he threw it at the necromancer. Boom! The lightning spear instantly hit the energy shield in front of the necromancer. The energy shield only froze for a second before it shattered. Then the remaining 2 bone shields blocked in front of the lightning spear, but they still shattered in less than a second, and the light of the lightning spear only dimmed a little. The middle-aged necromancer's face changed greatly. A golden ring in his hand was instantly activated, and a pale golden energy shield immediately appeared, blocking the lightning spear. The lightning spear and the energy shield were in a stalemate. At the point of contact, lightning surrounded the pale golden energy shield. Finally, with a bang, it turned into countless light spots and dissipated in the air. The lightning spear also became an arrow at the end of its flight. After breaking through the energy shield, it only had 1/5 of its size left, and then it hit the middle-aged necromancer. The middle-aged necromancer only felt pain in his chest, and a smell of burned flesh came. The middle-aged necromancer's chest was scorched black. Sulen quickly moved forward. Seeing that the middle-aged necromancer was about to continue casting, he directly threw a forbidden magic at him. The middle-aged necromancer who was about to cast a spell suddenly felt that the elemental energy around him was suddenly isolated from him. It was as if an invisible shield had appeared on the surface of his body. What is this? Why is my spell ineffective? After feeling that he was isolated from the elemental energy, the middle-aged necromancer's face changed greatly. You're the one who did this. I'm going to kill you. The middle-aged necromancer directly activated the 3rd black ring, and then a strange energy spread out in an instant. The next moment, Sulen suddenly felt as if his head was suddenly hit by a hammer, and his head was splitting open. Soul shock. However, this feeling came and went quickly. Sulen's movements stiffened for a moment, and then he recovered quickly. You have a lot of little things, Sulen sneered, and then the purple dragon halberd pierced through the necromancer's head like a poisonous snake. You. The necromancer looked at Sulen in disbelief, and his eyes dimmed instantly. He didn't expect Sulen to be so straightforward. Wasn't he going to work for him or torture him for his collection next? You're not playing by the rules. The middle-aged necromancer's body went soft, and then he collapsed on the ground. The left hand that was hidden under the necromancer's robe opened weakly, and a small black bead rolled out. Then it instantly burst open, and the middle-aged necromancer's body quickly turned black and decayed. Large amounts of flesh and blood were eroded, and a foul smell came out. In less than 10 seconds, the middle-aged necromancer's body was only left with a few rotten bones. Damn, what kind of poison is this? Seeing the middle-aged necromancer's end, Sullen's heart was still beating fast. Although he was confident in his own body, seeing such a strong poison, he still felt a chill in his heart. If this thing touched his body, even if he didn't die, his skin would be peeled off. Fortunately, he didn't learn from the villain and talk to him before the battle ended. Otherwise, the consequences wouldn't be too good. However, this poison was a little strange. It was only effective on flesh and blood, and the necromancer's clothes were not damaged at all. Sulen gently lifted the clothes with the purple dragon halberd, and 3 rings slid down. Seeing these 3 rings, Sullen's eyes lit up. He clearly saw the rings that the necromancer used just now, and these 3 rings were all magic items. He picked up the rings and checked them. The rings were not damaged. The 3 rings were embedded with 3 different colored gems, and the quality of the gems was very high. The spells in the rings had been released, and if he wanted to use them again, he would need to recharge them. Among the magic items, rings and earrings were very expensive because they were difficult to make. According to the effect of the necromancer's use, 2 of the 3 rings were protective spells, and the last one could launch a soul attack. Although the soul attack was blocked by Sulen, Sulen had the talent of iron will, and the effect of the soul attack was limited. If it was someone else today, the necromancer might have turned the tables. P.S. There's one more chapter, and it might be late. Chapter 223. Generally speaking, soul magic could only be used after reaching the legendary realm. Even at the legendary realm, the soul was still very mysterious. The ring in front of him could actually launch a soul attack. This kind of magic item could be said to be very precious. The disadvantages of forbidden magic were obvious. First, it was ineffective against legendary level, and second, it was ineffective against the spells that came with the magic item. So even if Sulen used forbidden magic, others could still use it if they had powerful magic items. Sulen let the system scan the 3 rings and saw their attributes. White Bone Control Ring +2, this ring is made from the skull of a bone demon. It is engraved with a complex magic circle. It can double the number of undead creatures you can control, below legendary level. This ring is made with a special refining technique. It can summon 4 bone shields. Equipment requirement, Spirit 18 and above. Special effect, Undead Control. Double the number of undead creatures you can control, below legendary level. Equipment effect, White Bone Shield. You can cast a spell without chanting. Once activated, you can summon 4 bone shields to protect yourself. The bone shields last for 10 minutes. It needs to be recharged after use. The second ring was completely gold. It looked like a gold ring inlaid with topaz. Sulen was very disdainful of the person who made this ring. He was like a rich man in the countryside. Golden Ring of Protection +2, this ring is made with gold alloy and other metals. It is engraved with a complex magic circle. The maker added a calming effect on it. Wearing it can clear your mind. At the same time, this ring is made with rune craftsmanship. It can summon a shield after activation. Requirements, 15 spirit. Equipment effect, calm. Once equipped, you can be in a calm state. Your mind will be clear and reduce the chance of casting a spell. Equipment effect, energy shield. Once activated, you can summon a spherical shield in an instant. The shield lasts for 15 minutes. The shield has the strength of a level 5 spell. It needs to be recharged after use. The last ring was the one that released the soul attack. This ring was black and looked very inconspicuous. However, this ring was the most valuable of the 3. Soul Impact Ring +2, this is a ring made by a legendary wizard. It is engraved with his most prized spells, but this ring is actually his practice. It can increase one's resistance to soul spells, and at the same time, it is engraved with a soul spell. Equipment requirement, Spirit 20 and above special effect, Soul resistance +1, increased resistance to soul spells, resistance to charm and mind control +1 equipment effect, Soul Shock. Upon activation, instantly unleash a soul shock within a 30-yard radius. All creatures within this range will have to undergo a soul test. If the soul test fails, the target will be fainted. This spell ignores all defensive effects other than the soul. Requires charging after casting. After seeing the attributes of the 3 rings, Su Len was even more surprised. This necromancer was too rich. Any of the 3 rings in front of him could be sold for hundreds of thousands of kinnar, and the most valuable one, the soul ring, could even be sold for millions of kinnar. This ring was simply invincible for people below the legendary level. The soul domain was a domain that only legendary people could enter. Before entering the legendary level, unless one had a special talent, the soul strength would not be too high. In the face of this kind of spell that directly attacked the soul, there was a 95% chance that it would fail. For people below the legendary level, this ring was a big killer. In addition to this skill, this item also increased the soul defense by a little. This was also very rare. It was the first time Su Len saw an item that could directly increase the soul defense, let alone increase the soul resistance to charm and mind control. Out of the other 2 rings, the bone ring was the least valuable. However, this ring could be considered a low-level artifact for necromancers. The effect of doubling the power of a summoned creature was too powerful. The biggest problem for necromancers was the number of undead creatures they could summon. Undead creatures never relied on quality to win. They relied entirely on their scalp-numbing numbers. The necromancer that Su Len killed was also unlucky. He should have been building his own undead army, but before he could finish, Su Len had bumped into him. Otherwise, there would be more than 100 undead creatures, less than 200 of them. If it was a month or 2 later, Su Len would have to face an army of undead creatures. At that time, unless he brought all the troops of North Town City, it would be very difficult to kill the necromancer. According to the real value, the bone ring was more valuable than the gold ring. However, necromancers were hated by everyone now. Other than using the bone shield for defense, this ring was of little value. As for the gold ring, although it looked old-fashioned, its effect was still quite good. The calming effect could reduce the probability of failure, which was very helpful for novice wizards. As for the shield, it had the effect of a level 5 spell, and its defensive ability was still very strong. Although the shield was broken by Sullen's lightning spear, Su Len was a legendary. Although he didn't use his full strength, not everyone could block his lightning spear. The fireball spell was only a level 3 spell, and the defensive effect of a level 5 spell was still very strong. To a certain extent, this ring was a blessing for wizards below the advanced level. Su Len put away the 3 rings and checked the rest of the items. There was a wizard robe, a white bone staff, 2 portal bags, and some miscellaneous items. The wizard robe was also a magic item, but it was a low-level magic item. It increased some magic resistance and defensive effect. It also had 3 additional spells, a cleaning spell, a repair spell, and an adaptation spell. The bone staff was more valuable. It could reduce the difficulty of casting spells and increase the power of spells. Unfortunately, the appearance of the bone staff was too bad. Anyone who took it out would know it was a villain. No one would take it out. When he went back, he would ask Hathaway to change the shape and make it look like a halberd. He would peel an apple for show air. Next were the 2 portal bags. Su Len was looking forward to these 2 portal bags. The 3 magic rings were a big harvest. He didn't know what good things were in these 2 portal bags. Since the original owner was dead, the secret imprint he left behind had lost its effect. Su Len easily destroyed the imprint and opened the portal bag. The space in the portal bag was not big. No, it was very small. The length, width, and height of this portal bag were only 50 centimeters, which was only 1/8 of a cubic meter. The things in this portal bag were slowly stuffed, but there were only food, clothes, and some coins. Other than that, there was nothing else. Sulen was a little disappointed, but this was normal. Wizards were used to using portal bags to store their daily necessities. After calming down, Sulen took out the other portal bag. Since the previous one was for personal items, this one was very valuable. After destroying the imprint skillfully, Sulen opened this portal bag. The space in this portal bag was much bigger than the previous one. It was about 1/2 of a cubic meter, which was quite big for a portal bag. Even Hathaway's largest portal bag was about the same size as this one. There were a lot more things in this portal bag. There were all kinds of materials from magic creatures, some potions, magic gems, and a dozen books. Sulen's eyes lit up. He took out a dozen books and started flipping through them. After a few minutes, he roughly flipped through the books. Most of these books were about magic theory and spell knowledge. There were also necromancy and curse spells. These things were the foundation of a wizard, so they were very valuable. Other than these, there were 2 books about runes and enchantments. They were also very valuable. 2 of the last 3 books were the necromancer's experiment records and summaries. The other one was a travelogue. It should be the necromancer's experience. Sulen briefly flipped through it. This necromancer was actually a noble. His name was Keaton Abbott. He was a noble from a western country. Because he had the potential to become a wizard, he was accepted by a wizard school. However, his potential was average, and he was very compatible with shadow undead. These 2 schools were not popular, so he was not taken seriously in the academy. However, during one of his adventures, he accidentally discovered the inheritance left behind by a necromancer. The bone ring and soul ring were found here. Keaton, who had obtained the necromancer's inheritance, naturally couldn't help but learn necromancy magic. At first, everything was normal. However, after he advanced, he was discovered by the organization that he was practicing forbidden spells. That wizard organization naturally demanded that he give up on practicing necromancy and imprisoned him. Faced with such a situation, Keaton defected with the inheritance of the necromancy wizard and fled. Because of his defection, he was wanted by the organization. At the same time, because of his practice of necromancy, other wizard schools did not welcome him. There were even radical ones who wanted him. In the end, he accidentally found a passage to the underground world and hid there. After making great progress in his practice of necromancy, he began to sneak back to the surface world to take revenge. After committing a few big crimes, he was severely injured. It was not easy for him to escape. The golden ring was his trophy. After recuperating, he began to travel in the underground world. This desolate underground world was a tunnel that he accidentally discovered, which led him to this place. In the records of this notebook, several drow cities were marked, but they were all very far from here. At the same time, Sulen had a preliminary understanding of the drow in the Underdark. Chapter 224. Other than the 3 rings, the necromancer's most precious items were the books. Including the ones Sulen found in his laboratory, there were more than 30 books. However, most of them were about necromancy and voodoo, and some were about magic theory. Other than that, there were books about alchemy, potioneering, golem making, anatomy, and a lich reincarnation spell. This lich reincarnation spell was a witchcraft ritual that could reincarnate a necromancer into a lich. It was said that this was a choice that many powerful necromancers made when their lives were about to end. The minimum requirement for the lich reincarnation spell was to be a grade 3 necromancer. They were usually necromancers or warlocks, but there were also some priests. Building a lich reincarnation spell circle required a lot of resources, including rare magic materials, high-quality gems, gold, and so on. If a lich was successfully reincarnated, it would turn into an undead creature and retain all of its memories and spells. After reincarnating into a lich, it would no longer be restricted by its lifespan. This gave it plenty of time to research spells and experiment. It could be said that every lich was a top-tier necromancer. They were powerful and controlled a lot of necromancy spells. It wouldn't be surprising if a team of death knights appeared in a lich's territory. There might even be a bone dragon. Liches would create a lot of magic items in their long lives. It could be said that liches were basically rich. The necromancer that died at Su Luan's hands was collecting all kinds of resources for the lich reincarnation spell. Although he looked very young, as a rogue necromancer, it would take at least a few decades for him to gather all kinds of materials for the lich reincarnation spell circle. Su Lan casually flipped through the book and threw it into his storage space. Su Lan had never thought about reincarnating into a lich. After all, liches didn't have a penis. After collecting the spoils of war, the other battlefields were almost finished. Under the ambush of the Grey Dwarves, the group of skeleton warriors didn't cause any trouble at all. It didn't take long for them to be wiped out. Apart from some soul crystals, there was nothing else. He had exterminated the necromancer and reclaimed the gemstone mine. He had also obtained a large number of soul crystals and magic books. His only regret was that he hadn't received much EXP. He was still a long way from leveling up. By the time they reoccupied the gem mine, it was already late. Everyone rested in the gem mine for the night. The next morning, after leaving a group of miners behind, Su Lan led the rest of the people to another mine. Su Lan had been to this mine before. It was the place where he had discovered the harpy. It was the largest mine of the Grey Dwarves. It produced iron ore, copper, lead, tin, and gold ore. It was a rare mixed mine, and its output was very high. This was also why the Duergar didn't give up on the mine even when the harpies attacked. When they set off again, there were only about 100 people left in the group. After passing through 3 tunnels and 2 underground caverns, the team finally arrived at their destination. There were some underworld monsters in the mine, but they were quickly cleared out by the Grey Dwarves. After the mine returned to normal, Su Lan prepared to deal with the harpies. This time, Su Lan didn't want a group of monsters coming to cause trouble every 2 or 3 days. Not only would they cause casualties to the Grey Dwarves, but they would also affect the production. If it weren't for this reason, Su Lan would have to wait a while before considering the harpies. Now that the Grey Dwarves had joined Northtown City and the mine had returned to production, the harpies could appear at any time. Before, the Grey Dwarves weren't strong enough, so they could only passively defend. Su Lan wasn't helpless against them. Moreover, the harpies could also be used as an air force. During battle, they could carry a few kilograms of stones and throw them down from the sky. Even a 1-kilogram stone would cause more damage than arrows and javelins. Even the Grey Dwarves' iron armor couldn't withstand such an impact. In addition to flying in the air and throwing stones, the harpies could also throw Molotov cocktails and other things. They could also take advantage of the night to cross the city walls and directly open the gates. If he really had an air force, it would be very useful on the battlefield. My lord, the harpies are active in the area ahead. A drow scout quickly walked to Sullen's side and said in a deep voice. Su Lan waved his hand and said, "Stop for now. Send someone out to investigate." Then, a dozen or so scouts flashed and merged into the surrounding darkness. The harpies lived in an underground cavern that was even larger than the one occupied by the Grey Dwarves. The harpies' nest was on a cliff, surrounded by an underground river. The underground cavern was lush with vegetation, and there were a lot of fluorescent mushrooms, and other plants growing in it. The entire underground cavern was their habitat. Opening the strategic map, a rough topographic map appeared in his mind. The underground cavern where the harpies were entrenched was dozens of kilometers away from the Grey Dwarves' territory, but various tunnels crisscrossed, and the shortest distance was more than 100 kilometers. Many areas around the map were still black, and would only be shown after exploration. As far as Su Lan knew, there weren't many tribes living in this underground world. There were no other tribes except for the Kobold tribe, the Grey Dwarf city, the Goblin tribe, and the Tauren tribe. Many places were occupied by various monsters. On the strategic map, the current area was marked with the image of a harpy, indicating that there were harpies nearby. The other explored areas were marked with hook horrors, and some were marked with underground salamanders. After a rough look, there were no less than a few hundred of them. There were thousands of harpies here. Although the strength of a single harpy was not strong, about the same as a human militia, their ability to fly made them very difficult to deal with. Coupled with their huge number, they could now be said to be the overlords of the underground world. Even the reckless and irritable Tauran tribe was not willing to provoke them. Soon, the scouts reported the collected information. At this time, more than half of the harpies had gone out to look for food, and only a few harpies stayed here. After confirming the situation, Sulen knew that the opportunity had come. Although the harpies had a large number of harpies, they had a common queen, a high harpy. As long as the high harpy was controlled, the whole harpy tribe would be controlled. Sulen did not let the drows go with him. It was better to have as few people as possible. After casting an invisibility spell on himself, Sulen began to carefully approach the harpy's nest. High harpies were natural spellcasters. It might be easy to defeat them, but it was very difficult to capture them alive. Especially under the protection of many harpies, it was impossible to capture the high harpy, Sulen, even if they doubled the number of people. The high harpy's nest was at the top of the cliff. If they wanted to go up, they could only fly or slowly climb from below. Directly using elemental fluctuations caused by spells was likely to attract the attention of the harpies. After all, they were very sensitive to wind elements. The cliff was not too high, and a large number of caves had been excavated. Sulen found an easy place to climb and then climbed up with his hands and feet. From time to time, a few harpies flew by in the sky. These harpies were very hot, but their appearance was not complimentary. Many harpies had a layer of fluff on their bodies. These were the lowest level harpies. Their bloodline had deteriorated to the point that they were close to beasts. Those harpies whose bodies were closer to humans were more intelligent. Some harpies could even use some spell-like abilities. Of course, there were not many of these harpies. They were generally the guards of the high harpies. Sulen bypassed the caves of several harpies and soon approached the top of the cliff. At this time, a harpy suddenly came out of the cave next to him and was about to fly out. But just as it spread its wings, it stopped. Then its nose kept twitching as if it was smelling something. The smell of a male. Harpy language, the harpy let out a sharp bird cry, and then the surrounding harpies flew over. Even the harpies in the surrounding caves came out. Seeing this situation, Sulen did not know that he had been exposed. Harpies were all females, so they were very sensitive to the smell of males. Although invisibility could hide the body, it could not eliminate the smell. This was also one of its weaknesses. Unless it was the legendary rogue's shadow jump, that ability could directly enter the shadow plane, completely separated from the main material plane. Not only was the figure hidden, but even the body and smell had disappeared without a trace. After knowing that he had been discovered, Sulen no longer hid. Now he was only one step away from the top of the cliff. As long as he was fast enough, the high harpy would have no time to escape. Thunderstorm. Dazzling lightning burst out from Sulen's body in an instant. The powerful lightning wrapped all the harpies around him. The paralysis effect of the lightning instantly made these harpies stiffen and fall directly from the air. Sulen, who was originally surrounded, was instantly cleared. At this moment, Sulen's hands and feet exerted force at the same time. His body climbed quickly, and he reached the top of the cliff in a breath. Then his figure flashed into the cave. To Sulen's surprise, the cave was much larger than he thought. 2 harpies were guarding the entrance of the cave. These 2 harpies looked very close to humans. After seeing Sulen break in, they rushed up directly. You're tuning into the A Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.